This world had burned his sentence onto the altar. Shepherd, rank F, trash. The guy couldn't take it anymore and went for the noose, and when the noose tightened, another man entered his body. The owner of 8,000 sheep in Montana. And this man knew for certain that the trash class wasn't trash at all. The smell comes first, not a hospital smell, not metallic, wet grass and sweet clover. Daniel opens his eyes wide and sees the sky. Too blue, too close. A sheep is hovering over him, a long muzzle, silvery undercoat, horns with a 1.5 twist. Sheep like that don't exist. He blinks. The sheep isn't going anywhere. It nudges his cheek with its wet nose. A real one. He struggles to sit up and realizes the body is not his own. The arms are thin, the fingers are long, a fresh red mark from a rope on his wrist. He looks up. A severed noose made of coarse twine hangs from an old willow tree. Someone slashed it with a knife. The last thing Daniel remembers is ice under his feet, a pole, a lamb tangled in wire, and a blow. And then grass, the sky, and a sheep with silver fleece. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know who he is now. But he counts the flock without getting up. 16 head, 1 old ram, gray-muzzled, clear-eyed, 4 ewes with swollen flanks, pregnant, 3 weeks until lambing. 1 lamb by the water, limping on its left front leg. Daniel stands up. His legs buckle. His body weighs barely 50 kilograms. Barefoot. A shirt of coarse cloth, pants held up by a string. He walks toward the limping lamb, not in a straight line, but in an arc so as not to scare it away. He crouches down 3 steps away. He holds out an open palm. The lamb glances at him with an amber eye and limps toward him. Daniel picks it up, light as a feather. He examines the hoof. A sharp pebble is lodged deep between the toes. It's been inflamed for a week. No one noticed, or didn't bother with it. He snaps off a twig from a willow and whittles a makeshift hoof knife. He secures the leg. He works millimeter by millimeter. "Hush, little one," he whispers in a foreign language that his body somehow knows. The pebble comes out, black and sharp. Daniel carries the lamb to the stream and washes the wound. No pus. Lucky. "Well then, you'll be Button." He sets her down on the ground. 1 step, another. She steps on her injured leg. And this is where the work begins. Daniel circles the flock and reads it like an open book. 4 ewes are thinner than they should be. 3rd trimester, but lacking protein. They need salt. They need a mineral block. 3 sheep with dirty hind legs, loose stools, parasites, or water. He goes down to the puddle where half the flock drinks and finds a bloated, dead rat by the bank. There's the reason. He clenches his jaw. Higher up the slope, a spring gurgles. Clean, cold water gushes from under a rock. Daniel drives the flock uphill. The sheep resist. They're used to the lower pasture. He doesn't rush them. He walks behind. One by one, they climb up and drink the clean water. Kanopka is first, a small thing. But it's these small things that make up a healthy flock. The sun is at its zenith. Daniel sits down on a rock and gathers fragments of someone else's memory. The body of a 17-year-old boy, an orphan. His name is Dan. A hollow between 3 hills. A village of 30 households. 16 communal sheep were dumped on him because no one else wanted to tend this pitiful patch of land. 2 months ago, the rite of awakening. The altar revealed his class. Shepherd. Rank F. The lowest. The village's laughingstock. His fiancée broke off the engagement that very evening. The boy went and hanged himself because the crystal decided that herding sheep was a death sentence. 2 people are climbing up the path from below. An old man with a cane and a woman in an apron. They're carrying bread. They look at him as if he were a sick dog. Pity and fear. The old man asks how he's feeling. He says the priest has ordered him to come to the temple to thank the altar gods for showing mercy. Daniel nods and thanks him for the bread. Inside, he counts 16 heads, lambing in 3 weeks. He needs salt, a knife, and a rope, not for a noose, for a pen. The old man leaves. Daniel breaks the bread, eats half, and crumbles the other half for the emaciated Knopka. Evening creeps up unnoticed. The village below smokes from its chimneys. Daniel almost laughs. Trash class. On his ranch in Montana, 8,000 head brought in 400,000 a year. He knows exactly how to grow a herd from 16 to 600 in 3 years. How to bring lamb mortality down to 2%. And this world calls it trash. Fine. He lies down on the grass. Knopka presses herself against his side. Her wool is warm. The silvery undercoat is fine and strong. Daniel mechanically estimates the micron count. Less than 20. That's cashmere quality. Our last before bed isn't about how to get home. It's about how the 4 pregnant ewes need mineral supplements, and he has no idea where to get them around here. Morning comes with the cold. He gets up before dawn. Habit. 6 years on the ranch, up at 5, no days off. Sheep don't know what Sunday is. He makes his rounds. 16, 16. Everyone's in place. Nop gets down on all fours and steps on his sore leg. And then something strange happens. The sun touches the eastern hill. The first ray falls on the flock. And Daniel feels it. A thin thread stretches from each sheep to his chest, and warmth flows through the threads. He freezes. His hands grow heavy, not from pain, from strength. He bends down toward a flat stone weighing 40 kilograms and lifts it with one hand, easily, like an empty bucket. Everyone knows that shepherds get a +1 to stamina for their heads. But that's not the whole truth. Daniel feels the difference between the threads. A ram sends a powerful surge. Pregnant ewes send a lot too, but the sick ewe on the edge with dull wool gives off almost nothing. A sick animal doesn't give off strength. It all depends on health, on calmness, on trust. And Daniel smiles for the first time in 2 days, truly, because this world thinks that 16 sheep are 16 units and that's the limit. But it doesn't know about rotational grazing, about balancing micronutrients, about selection, quarantine, and herd stress. This world doesn't know that a happy, healthy sheep is not at all the same as just a sheep. But Daniel knows. He dusts off his knees and looks east, where the sun is rising over 3 hills. Somewhere in this world, there are order academies and high-ranking heroes. But here stands a skinny guy with a trash tier class and a flock of 16. And he knows exactly what to do next. Find salt. Build a pen. Heal that sheep on the edge. He heads down toward the village. Nop limps along behind him. The village of Loshchina was waking up with the roosters. Daniel reached the first houses just as smoke was rising from the chimneys. The houses were made of mud brick with thatched roofs, low, dark. A muddy path ran between them. Chickens, a dog tied to a post, the smell of manure and sour bread. People were watching him. He could feel their eyes. From the windows, from behind the fences, someone was whispering. His body's memory reminded him. 2 days ago, that guy had put a noose around his neck. The whole village knew. The whole village felt sorry for him, and the whole village was afraid to approach, as if a failed suicide attempt were a contagious disease. Daniel walked along the path, his eyes searching for what he needed. A shop, a blacksmith shop, anything resembling a place where he could get salt and a tool. He found the blacksmith shop by the sound, the thud of a hammer, heavy, rhythmic. The blacksmith turned out to be a burly man with black hands and a red beard. Standing nearby was a young man his own age. Strong, broad-shouldered, the blacksmith's son, the former fiancé of Dan's former fiancé. Daniel stopped at the entrance. The blacksmith turned. He looked at him with the same expression. Pity, awkwardness, a touch contempt. Daniel said he needed a knife, a small one, for hooves, and asked if there was salt in the village. The blacksmith exchanged a glance with his son. The son snorted, said something about how the fool would be better off going to the temple then begging for knives. Daniel looked at him, calmly, without anger, without resentment. The blacksmith's son looked away first. The blacksmith paused and pulled an old knife with a broken handle out of a box. He said it would cost 3 copper coins. Daniel reached into his pockets. He found 4 copper coins in his pants pocket. That was all the cash Dan had. He handed over 3. The knife was dull and crooked, but it was metal, not a splinter. It would do. He found salt at the miller's, an old shed on the edge of the village. The miller traded grain, flour, and odds and ends. Salt was expensive, a whole coin for a handful. Daniel gave away his last one. Now he was penniless, completely. But he had a knife and a handful of salt. He returned to the hill. The flock was grazing by the spring. Kanapka ran toward him. She was barely limping. Daniel crouched down and let her sniff the salt. Then he found a flat stone. He poured half the salt onto it. He smeared it out. It turned into a rough salt lick. The sheep approached a minute later. They licked greedily. They hadn't had salt in a long time, maybe ever. In this world, mineral supplements for livestock are apparently not what anyone thinks they are. Daniel watched. A ram approached first. The ewes followed, then the rest. That ewe on the edge, with the dull coat. She came over too. She licked for a long time, longer than the others, a severe deficiency. She needs more than salt. She needs a proper diet. Daniel walked down the slope. He examined the grass. White clover, sweet clover, a nameless bluegrass, some other grasses. He pulled up stems and sniffed them and rubbed them between his fingers and tasted them on his tongue. That was his method, old-fashioned, practical. No textbook can replace the knowledge of hands and tongue. An hour later, he had mapped it out in his head. Upper slope, good grass, lots of clover. Lower slope, poor soil, more grasses, less protein. A ravine to the west, damp. Something resembling alfalfa was growing there. If it really was alfalfa or its local equivalent, it was gold, protein, minerals, just what pregnant mares need. He drove the herd toward the ravine. The ewes pounced on the greenery. They ate greedily. Daniel nodded. Alfalfa, or something very close to it. Now for the plan. In the morning, the herd on the upper slope by the spring. In the afternoon, moved to the ravine for 2 hours. In the evening, back up. Rotation. Simple. Basic. But no one had done it that way here. Here, they simply left the flock in one spot until the grass ran out. For the next 3 days, Daniel worked, from dawn to dusk. Every morning, he felt a surge of strength from the flock. Stronger with each passing day. Not because there were more sheep, there were still 16, because they had become healthier. Salt, clean water, pasture rotation. The sheep with the dull coat began to come to life. Their bowel movements normalized on the second day. Their coats weren't shiny yet, but their eyes grew clearer. Daniel could feel the difference in the flow. Before, it had been a thin, weak trickle. Now the trickle had grown stronger. Not a stream yet, but not a drop either. On the 4th day, he built a pen. Or rather, he rebuilt the old one. The one that stood at the foot of the hill was rotten and crooked. 3 poles were held together by a promise. Daniel decided to build a new one. Higher up, closer to the spring. You needed posts. He went to the grove at the edge of the pasture. He found 3 suitable trees. Thin, straight, not too old. He took out his knife. He looked at the knife. He looked at the tree. The knife was small. The tree was as thick as his palm. It would take half an hour. Or he remembered the morning stream. He remembered the rock he'd lifted with one hand. 40 kilograms. With one hand. He walked up to the tree, gripped the trunk with both hands, and pulled. The tree came out of the ground, roots and all, like a carrot from a garden bed. Daniel stood there and looked at it. The tree in his hands, the roots in the air, dirt falling away. He looked around. No one. He set the tree on the ground, pulled out 2 more, chopped off the branches with a knife. trim them, dug the posts into the new spot, tied the poles with twine. By evening, the pen was ready. Not pretty, but sturdy. Konopka was the first to go inside. She sniffed the post, rubbed her side against it. Approved. Daniel crouched by the pen and thought. His strength was growing. Every morning. Today he'd pulled 3 trees out of the ground with his bare hands. That's not normal for any F rank. Not for a D rank either. Maybe not even for a C rank. But no one knows. No one has seen it. And he wanted it to stay that way. For now. On the 5th day, an old man with a cane came by. The same one who used to bring bread. His body's memory suggested the name. Korlik, a neighbor. He was herding his flock on the lower pasture. Horlick came and looked at the new pen. He looked at the flock by the spring. He looked at Daniel. He asked why he'd moved the sheep up here. The grass is thicker down there. Daniel said the water down there was bad. Horlick didn't understand. Daniel explained. There's a rat in the puddle, stagnant water, bacteria. He didn't know the local word for bacteria and said something like invisible dirt. Horlick looked at him like he was a fool. He said his father had grazed sheep by that puddle for 40 years and nothing had happened. Daniel didn't argue. He nodded, said he might be right. Horlick left. A week later, Horlick's flock started dying off. An old ewe died first, then a lamb, then 2 more. 4 animals in 10 days. Horlick ran around the village. He called for the priest. The priest came and prayed. It didn't help. He called a healer from the neighboring village. The healer gave some kind of decoction. It didn't help. The sheep kept dying. Daniel knew the cause. Leptospirosis, or the local equivalent. Bacteria from a dead rat had gone into the water. The sheep drank it. They got infected. The incubation period is 7 to 10 days. Then kidney failure. Then death. His flock was clean. He had moved them to the spring on the 2nd day. Just in time, he thought. Go to Horlick, to tell him, to explain. But Horlick didn't listen to him the first time. He wouldn't listen the 2nd time either. And he went anyway. He found Horlick by the pen. The old man was sitting on the ground next to a dead lamb, staring silently ahead. Daniel sat down beside him. He said the remaining sheep needed to be moved to clean water, right now. He said the puddle needed to be filled in. Horlick turned to him. There was anger in his eyes. He said a kid from the trash class wasn't going to teach him how to herd sheep. Daniel stood up. He nodded. He went back to his pen. 3 days later, 2 more of Horlick's sheep died. And then Horlick came himself. He stood silently by Daniel's pen and looked at his healthy, shiny flock. Daniel went out to him. He didn't say a word about the warning he'd given. He just asked how many were left. 12. There had been 18, 6 dead. Daniel said, "Drive them up to my place. There's clean water here. There's plenty of room." Horlick stood and looked at him for a long time. Then he nodded. He drove his flock over. Daniel kept them separate from his own, quarantine, at least 2 weeks. He explained to Horlick that you can't mix flocks until you're sure they're all healthy. Horlick listened. He was silent. He didn't argue anymore. Over the course of that week, the village looked at Daniel differently for the first time. Not pity, not contempt, something new, incomprehension. A shepherd with a trash class flock. His flock hadn't lost a single head. His lamb that had been limping was already running up the slope like a healthy one. His sheep's wool was glossy, and Horlick had 6 corpses. The village whispered, but Daniel didn't listen. He was counting. 16 heads, 4 pregnant, lambing in 10 days. He needed warm bedding. He needed a clean rag. He needed light. Yarka might lamb at night, and she would need help. He was getting ready. He gathered dry grass. He spread it in the corner of the pen. He found an old lantern in an abandoned shed on the outskirts. Clay, with a hole for oil. There was no oil. He rendered fat from the wool. Lanolin. It burns poorly. It smokes, but it burns. On the 13th day after his awakening in this world, Daniel sat in the pen and waited. The first ewe lay on her side. It had begun. He knelt down beside her. His hands were washed. The knife was clean. The rag was clean. The ewe was breathing heavily. Daniel placed his palm on her side. Quiet. Good girl. Come on. He had attended hundreds of births. Thousands. On the ranch in Montana during the season, he slept 3 hours a night. He went from pen to pen. He pulled lambs out, wiped them down, set them on their feet, tied the umbilical cord, placed them with their mothers. That was his life. And now his hands worked on their own. The lamb came out head first, the right position. Daniel caught it, wiped it down with a rag, cleared its nose. Tiny, wet, warm, alive. The lamb sneezed and bleated in the high-pitched voice. The ewe turned her head and began licking it. Daniel sat down on the ground and exhaled. 1. 3 left. By morning, all 4 ewes had given birth. 7 lambs. 3 sets of twins and 1 single. All alive, all healthy. Daniel hadn't slept all night. He delivered them one by one. The lantern was smoking. His hands were covered in blood and mucus. His back wouldn't straighten. But all 7 got to their feet. All 7 found an udder. All 7 began to suckle. 23 heads. There were 16. Now there were 23. Daniel sat in the pen on the wet straw. Around him lay the ewes with their newborns. Kanopka made her way between them and settled down by his knee. Dawn came, and with it came the surge. 23 threads. 7 of them thin and delicate as spider webs. Newborns. They gave almost nothing, a drop, but they were there. And 4 ewes that had just given birth. They gave more than yesterday, much more. Daniel felt the power filling him, deeper than before. He raised his hand, clenched his fist. Muscles that hadn't been there yesterday bulged beneath his skin. Not huge, but firm. He stood up. His body didn't ache. The pain was gone. He walked over to the stone millstone lying by the old barn. Big, heavy. News of the lambing had spread through the village in half a day. 7 lambs, all alive. Dan's, the very same Dan who had been hanging in a noose 2 weeks ago. The old women shook their heads. The men frowned. The priest of the altar temple, a fat man with an oily voice and soft hands. He came to the pen in person. He by the fence. He looked at the lambs. He looked at Daniel. He said that the gods of the altar were merciful, that Dan must come to the temple and make a thank offering. 1 lamb. Daniel looked at him. His face was calm. His eyes were cold. He said he wouldn't give up a single lamb. The priest flushed. He said that refusing the sacrifice was an insult to the altar. That status is granted by the gods, and the gods can take it away. Daniel nodded. He said that if the gods wanted to take it back, they should come themselves. And he wouldn't give the priest a lamb. The priest left. His back was straight. His step was heavy. Daniel knew he had made an enemy. A petty one, but a vindictive one. The priest controlled the village through fear of the altar. A guy who isn't afraid of the altar is a threat to his power. Daniel went back to work. He had no time to think about the priest. 23 heads, 7 newborns. Newborn lambs are at their most vulnerable. The first 2 weeks decide everything. Hypothermia, infection, malnutrition, injury. He slept in the pen every night, woke up every 2 hours, checked, counted, touched their noses. A wet nose is a healthy nose. Dry and hot is a problem. All 7 were growing, fast. On the 4th day after lambing, a girl came to the pen. Daniel didn't notice her right away. She was standing behind the fence, quiet, skinny, gray eyes, tangled hair, a baggy dress, her hands tucked into her sleeves. She stood there, watching the lambs. Daniel was milking a ewe. He turned his head. The girl froze, like a rabbit before a dog, ready to run. Daniel didn't look at her. He kept milking. A minute later, the girl relaxed. Another minute later, she took a step closer. Another minute later, she was standing right by the fence. Daniel finished milking. Milk in a wooden bucket. White, thick. It smelled sweet. He poured a mug, set it on a fence post. Without looking at the girl, he just set it down and went to the next pen. When he returned, the mug was empty. The girl was standing in the same spot, milk on her upper lip. Her eyes were huge, frightened and grateful at the same time. Daniel poured another mug. This time he looked at her. He asked her name. She was silent for a long time. Then she said quietly, "Hana." Daniel nodded. He asked if she was hungry. Hana didn't answer. She didn't need to. He could see her collarbones, her wrists, the dark circles under her eyes. This girl hadn't eaten properly in a long time. He took the leftover bread out of the bag, poured a full jug of milk, held it out to her. Hana took it. Her hands were shaking. She drank and ate standing up, quickly, like an animal afraid it would be taken away. Daniel waited until she was done. Then he asked, "Do you know how to milk?" Hana nodded. He opened the pen gate, pointed to a ewe that hadn't been milked yet. Hana went in, sat down next to the ewe, placed her hands on the udder. Her hands were small but steady. She knew what she was doing. Milk flowed into the bucket in thin streams. The ewe stood calmly. She didn't flinch. She didn't step out of place. Daniel watched. Animals sense people. It's not magic. It's a fact. A sheep won't let a nervous person near it. An angry one even less so. Hana was as quiet as water in a pond, and Yarka could sense it. Hana milked, and her face bore an expression Daniel had seen hundreds of times. On people who are doing something for the first time and realize they're capable of it. A small, quiet joy. She finished. She looked up at him. He told her to come tomorrow morning. Hana came, and the next day, and the next. On the fourth day, Daniel learned her story. Not from her, she hardly spoke, from an old woman neighbor who brought him a bowl of porridge in exchange for a mug of milk. Hana Lee, 16 years old. She had undergone the rite of awakening 3 months ago. The altar showed nothing, emptiness, no class, no rank, not even an error, just silence. The priest declared her cursed, classless. Nothing like this had ever happened in the village. Classless is worse than the trash rank. It's nothing at all. Hana's parents were alive, but from that day on, they stopped speaking to her. Father, mother, younger brother. They didn't kick her out, formally. They just stopped noticing her. Hana slept in the barn, ate scraps. She only came to the well for water at night, so no one would see her. 3 months. Daniel listened to the old woman and said nothing. He clenched his teeth. His hands lay on his knees. His fingers were white. When the old woman left, he sat there for a long time. He watched as Hana combed the wool on the old ram's flank. The ram stood still. He closed his eyes. He liked it. Hana liked it. 2 creatures the world had written off. A classless girl and an old ram with a gray muzzle. And they were happy. Daniel stood up. He walked over to Hana. She looked up. The familiar fear flashed in her eyes, that he would send her away, that he would tell her to leave, that the milk was gone. Daniel said they had to start shearing tomorrow. The undercoat was ready. If they didn't shear now, the sheep would suffer from the heat. There was a lot of work. He couldn't handle it alone. He asked if she would stay, for good. Hana looked at him. For a long time, her lips trembled. She quickly turned away and nodded. She didn't say a word, but she nodded. Daniel nodded back. He said she could sleep in the pen. The straw is clean. It's warm. The ewes don't mind. Kanapka even less so. That night, Hannah slept in the pen. Kanapka lay next to her. In the morning, Daniel woke up and saw that Hannah was already milking, silently, intently. The bucket was half full. She had gotten up before him. He didn't say anything. He just started his morning rounds. They sheared wool for 3 days. Daniel had only a knife, not scissors. A knife, a dull one, crooked. Shearing with a knife is torture for both the sheep and the shearer. On a ranch in Montana, he'd worked with an electric clipper, 400 head per shift. Here, 1 sheep took an hour. But the wool was worth it. When the first fleece fell onto the spread-out rag, Daniel crouched down and touched it. A silvery undercoat, fine, soft, long. He pinched a strand between his thumb and forefinger and pulled. It didn't snap. It was resilient. It sprang back. He held it up to the light. The strand glistened, not like ordinary wool, brighter, with a slight pearlescent sheen. It was something incredible. Daniel sat over the fleece and counted. If the microns were below 18, and he was sure they were, if the staple length was more than 10 centimeters, and it was, if the sheen and elasticity remained after washing, then this wasn't just good wool. It was the best wool he'd ever seen in his life. In both lives, on Earth and here. He carefully folded the fleece, put it in a bag. Hana watched him. He said this wool was worth money. Big money. Hana didn't understand. She'd never seen big money. A week after lambing, the flock settled into a rhythm. Morning, dawn, the flow. 23 strands, stronger with each passing day. The sheep were healthy, well-fed, calm. Daniel knew them all, every face, every personality. The old ram he named Count, calm, wise, walks at the head of the flock. The young ewe with a red spot on her forehead, restless, always getting into trouble. He named her Redhead. The fat, phlegmatic sheep who always ate last and lay down first, Auntie. Each one gave him something of her own. Count gave a dense, heavy flow, strength and endurance. Redhead gave something light, quick, speed, maybe agility. Aunt gave steady warmth, steadfastness, stability. Daniel began to understand the system. It wasn't just numbers. Each animal gave what it was. A healthy, confident animal gave strength. A calm, peaceful one gave stability. A fast, energetic one gave agility. The system mirrored the animal's character in the shepherd's traits. And the better the shepherd cared for them, the stronger the mirror became. He didn't tell anyone, not even to Hana. It was too soon. On the 20th day, the county magistrate arrived in the village. A heavy-set man on horseback. 2 soldiers accompanied him. Daniel stood on the hill and watched as they rode along the path toward the village headman's house. His body's memory reminded him. The county magistrate comes once every 3 months. He collects taxes, checks the class register, registers new members. Daniel went down to the village only when they sent a boy to fetch him. The headman was summoning everyone who had undergone the rite in the last quarter, Daniel and 2 other guys from the village. He stood in the village headman's house. Low ceiling, the smell of onions and smoke. The county headman sat at the table. A thick book lay before him, the register. A priest stood nearby. His face was oily. His eyes darted about. The district head looked in the book. He looked at Daniel. He said what he saw. Dan, class, shepherd, rank, F. He asked how many head were in the herd. Daniel said 23. The headman raised an eyebrow. He wrote it down. Then he said the community owed the miller a debt, 4 gold, and that the community could pay off the debt with labor, 1 laborer for a year. He looked at Daniel. The priest standing nearby nodded. So that's it. The priest had found a way to get rid of the stubborn shepherd, sell him into labor, formally legal. The community's debt is covered by community resources. An F-rank shepherd is the most useless resource. It makes sense to give him up. Daniel stood and said nothing. He was thinking. He had no money, no influence, no status. He could lift this table along with the village head with one hand, but that wasn't a solution. It was a problem. He looked at the county headman. He asked if he could pay off the debt with goods. The headman hesitated. He said, yes, if the goods were worth 4 gold pieces. Daniel said that in a month he would bring wool, a shipment, wool the likes of which had never been seen in this county, and it would be worth more than 4 gold pieces. The headman snorted. The priest grimaced. But formally, he couldn't refuse. The law allows debts to be paid off with goods. Daniel was given a month. He left the house and walked back up the hill. a month. He needed to shear the entire flock, wash the wool. The shearing took 12 days, 23 sheep, with a knife. Each sheep was an hour of painstaking work. Daniel sheared while Hannah held them. She learned quickly to pin the sheep on its side, to press its head to the ground with her palm, not roughly, gently, but firmly, so the sheep wouldn't squirm and the blade wouldn't cut the skin. Daniel sheared and talked, not to Hannah, to the sheep. He called each one by name. Good redhead, calm auntie. Good girl, Graf, stand still. Hannah listened. She was silent at first. Then she began to repeat, in a quiet voice, almost a whisper. Good girl, stay calm. Daniel heard her but didn't let on. The fleeces were being packed into sacks, one after another. Daniel inspected each fleece separately. He sorted them by quality. The best had a silvery undercoat. That was from Graf and the pregnant ewes. The fiber was thinner than a spider web, long, springy. It shone in the light. The medium quality ones were from the other adults, also good, but not as fine. The lamb's was soft and short, not marketable yet, but it will be in a year. Then washing. Daniel hauled water from the spring, 2 large tubs. He found one behind the barn. He borrowed the second from Korlik. Korlik gave it to him without a word. After the die-off, he came to Daniel's pen every day. He stood there. He watched. He learned. His remaining 12 sheep grazed next to Daniel's, separately, quarantine, but already healthier than they had been. Clean water was doing its job. Washing the fleece is a process. 3 rinses. The first in warm water to wash off the grease. The second in cool water to make the fibers contract and compact. The third in cold water to set it. Then drying, on rocks, on grass, in the sun. Daniel spread out the fleeces and turned them every 2 hours. Hannah helped. She did it with such care, as if she were laying out jewels rather than wool. Maybe she could sense it. After 5 days, the wool was ready. Daniel laid out the best fleeces on a clean cloth and examined them. The fiber had become even better after washing, silvery, soft, with a pearlescent sheen that hadn't faded. He took a tuft and held it up to the light. Almost transparent, like silk, but stronger than silk, much stronger. In his past life, such fiber would have fetched dollars a pound, at least, maybe 300, at auction, even 500. The question was whether this world understood its value. He packed the best wool into 3 sacks, the average quality into 5, 8 sacks in total. Hannah watched him. She asked where he was going. Daniel said, to the city, to the county seat. There's a market there. There are merchants there. Hannah pressed her lips together. She was afraid to be left alone with the herd. Daniel saw that. He crouched down in front of her, looked her in the eyes, said he believed her, that the herd knew her, that Graf would obey, that Kanopka wouldn't leave her side, that he'd be back by evening tomorrow. Hannah nodded. Her eyes were shining, but she didn't cry. Daniel left at dawn, 3 sacks of the finest wool on his back. His body carried them easily, the morning breeze, 23 strands. He walked along the road and sensed every sheep, like a distant echo. The count stands on the hill. The redhead drinks water. The aunt lies down and chews. Kanopka is next to Hannah. The threads stretched into the distance. They grew weaker, but didn't break. Interesting. It was a 4-hour walk to the county seat. Daniel made it in 2.5. The town turned out to be a large village, 1,000 inhabitants, maybe 1,500. Stone houses, a market square, shopping arcades, a smithy, a tavern, a guild. He went to the market. He was looking for a cloth or wool merchant. He found 3. The first one looked at his clothes. Bare feet, dirty pants. He turned away without listening. The second opened the sack. He looked inside. He crumpled the wool in his hands. His expression didn't change. He offered 5 silver coins for the whole lot. Daniel knew it was a ripoff. 5 silver coins for wool that was worth 10 times as much. The merchant thought he was a country bumpkin who didn't know his worth. Daniel politely took the sack and left. The third merchant sat in a shop on the corner. A small sign, a dim room. It smelled of dyes and dried herbs. The merchant was old, thin. His fingers were long and yellow from work. He looked at Daniel expressionlessly. Daniel silently opened the bag. He took out the best fleece. He placed it on the counter. The old man reached for it. He took it. He held it up to the light. His fingers ran over the fibers, quickly, like a professional. The old man froze. He brought the fleece closer. He sniffed it. He stretched the fiber between his fingers. He looked at the light. He lowered the fleece. He looked at Daniel. His eyes were different. Not indifferent, sharp. He asked where he had gotten it. Daniel said from his own flock, the valley between the 3 hills. The old man was silent. He said he'd been trading wool for 40 years. He said he'd seen wool from all 6 provinces. He'd seen royal wool from the Duke of Valmore's flocks. He said he'd never seen anything like this. Daniel waited in silence. The old man named his price, 2 gold pieces per pound. Daniel did the math. 3 sacks held about 20 pounds of the finest wool. 2 gold pieces per pound came to 40 gold pieces. The community debt was 4 gold pieces. 40 gold pieces was 10 community debts. He didn't show his surprise. He just nodded. He said he agreed, but he had a condition. The old man raised an eyebrow. Daniel said he needed tools, shearing shears, real ones, steel ones. He needed salt, a lot, a sackful. He needed rope. He needed cloth for bandages. And he needed information. Who in town trades in livestock? What breeds are in the area? What the prices are? The old man listened. Then he nodded. An hour later, Daniel walked out of the shop. On his belt was a purse with 35 gold pieces. In the sack were shears and a coil of rope, a sack of salt, and a roll of clean cloth. He had traded wool for goods for 5 gold pieces. He received 35 in cash. The old man's name was Master Alden. He had been trading wool since he was 20. His customers were in the capital, tailors, seamstresses, people who sew clothes for aristocrats. Master Alden said he would take all the wool Daniel brought, all of it, any amount, at the same price. Daniel nodded. He thanked him. He went home. On the way back, he thought, 35 gold pieces. For a country boy with an F rank, that's a fortune. With that money, he could buy a house, 2 houses. But he didn't need houses. He needed sheep. Good ones, healthy ones, for breeding. A breeding ram, a young one, with a strong gene pool, to crossbreed with his ewes and produce even better offspring. In his past life, he'd been doing this for 6 years. Breeding takes time. It takes generations. It takes records. Which ram mated with which ewe, what kind of lambs were born, what the wool quality was, what the weight gain was, what the disease resistance was. He would do the same thing, only here, only with rams with silver undercoats and horns that curve 1.5 turns. He returned to the hollow at sunset. Hana was standing by the pen. She saw him and ran to meet him. She stopped 3 steps away. She didn't dare come any closer. Daniel smiled. He set the bag on the ground, untied it, took out the shears, held them out to her. Hana took them, turned them over in her hands. Steel, sharp, shiny. She looked at him. He said that now it would be easier to cut her hair. Then he took out something else, a small bundle. At the market, he'd noticed a stall selling trinkets. He'd bought it for a copper penny. He unwrapped it. A comb, wooden, with fine teeth, for hair. He handed it to Hana. She looked at the comb, at his hand, at his face. She took it, pressed it to her chest, turned away quickly. Daniel pretended not to notice as she wiped her eyes with her sleeve. He went to the pen. He counted the herd. 23, all accounted for, all healthy. Kanapka ran toward him. She wasn't limping anymore, not at all. He lifted her into his arms, held her to his chest, warm, alive. 4 kilograms of trust. The next morning, he went to the village elder. The man was sitting in the yard, repairing the fence. He saw Daniel and frowned. Daniel placed 4 gold coins on the fence, said it was to pay off the community debt, in full. The village elder looked at the coins. He looked at Daniel. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. He asked where they came from. Daniel said he had sold wool. The village head picked up a coin. He turned it over. Genuine. Gold. 4 of them. A communal debt that had been outstanding for 3 years. Settled. By an F-rank shepherd. The village head sat for a long time, staring at the coins. Then he looked at Daniel. There was something new in his eyes. Not pity. Not contempt. Confusion. Daniel nodded and left. The priest found out that same day. Daniel saw him standing by the village headman's house, talking to him. His face was red. His arms were waving. His plan had failed. They wouldn't hand Daniel over as a farmhand. The debt was no more. Daniel didn't wait for a reaction. He returned to the hill, to the herd, to work. 3 days after returning from the city, he began to expand the pen. The old fence surrounded a small patch of land. It was enough for 16. It was already too cramped for 23, and there would be more. He cut down trees at the edge of the grove. This time, he didn't pull them up by the roots. Someone might have seen him. He chopped them down with a knife. It took a long time. It was inefficient. He needed an axe. He would buy an axe the next time he went into town. The new pen turned out to be 3 times larger than the old one, with a separate section for the lambs, with a canopy of poles and straw in case of rain, with a salt lick, with a trough made from a hollowed-out log, into which he had channeled water from the spring through a clay trough. Hannah helped, silently. She hauled straw. She smeared clay into the cracks. She handed him the poles. She didn't ask why. She saw. The pen was being built for the flock. The flock was her job, so the pen was her job too. Daniel looked at her and thought that this girl, whom the world had written off, worked harder and better than half the village. On the 25th day after waking up, another event occurred. A small one, but an important one. At Horlick's neighbor's place, one of the remaining sheep couldn't give birth. The lamb was coming out the wrong way, back legs first. Horlick ran over to Daniel's pen. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. He said the sheep was dying. Daniel went with him. The sheep was lying on her side, breathing heavily, eyes cloudy. Daniel crouched down. He washed his hands. He examined it. The lamb was walking backward. A classic case. On the ranch in Montana, he'd turned lambs around hundreds of times. But there, he'd had gloves, gel. Here, just his hands and water. He wiped his hands on a rag, carefully inserted his hand, found the lamb, small, alive, moving. Daniel felt for the hind legs, slowly, carefully, turned it around, millimeter by millimeter. The ewe was moaning. Corlick stood nearby, clenching his fists. 10 minutes later, the lamb came out, alive, wet, weak, but alive. Daniel wiped it down, cleared its nose, placed it with its mother. The ewe raised her head and began to lick it. Corlick stood and watched. Tears streamed down his cheeks. An old man, 60 years old, crying over a lamb. Because over the past month, he'd lost 6 sheep, and every new life was a miracle. Daniel stood up, wiped his hands. He said the lamb would be weak for the first few days. It needed to be watched, kept warm, given milk if the mother couldn't feed it. Horlick nodded. Then he looked at Daniel for a long time and said something Daniel hadn't expected. He said that when the boy was assigned to the shepherd's class, he laughed along with everyone else. He said he was ashamed. Daniel put his hand on his shoulder. He said it didn't matter. What mattered was that the lamb was alive. Horlick nodded. That evening, he came to Daniel's pen and brought his best ewe with him, young, healthy. He said it was a gift for the lamb. Daniel wanted to refuse. Then he looked at the ewe. Strong, good bone structure. The wool wasn't as fine as his sheep's, but it was thick and dense. Fresh blood for the flock, a new gene pool. He accepted her. He thanked him. The ewe entered the pen. The others sniffed her. They accepted her calmly. The count watched with interest. 24 heads. Daniel stood by the pen and counted. 24. A month ago, there were 16. A month had passed since the awakening. 30 days. Daniel kept track with notches on the pen post. A new notch every morning. A new arrival every morning. A herd of 24 gave him so much strength that he stopped measuring it in his usual terms. He could lift a rock that weighed more than he did. He could run through the hills for an hour without getting out of breath. He could stay on his feet for a full day and not feel tired until evening. But the strength was fading. By sunset the next day, he was back to being an ordinary, skinny guy. He tested it on purpose. One morning, after the morning rush, he walked away from the herd. Further and further. The threads stretched. They weakened. After 3 miles, he felt the first dip. After 5 miles, his body grew heavy. After 10, he could barely walk. He returned to the flock almost at a run. The threads tightened and filled up again. The strength returned instantly, like water into a vessel. The tether. He couldn't go far. He couldn't stay away for long. Without the flock, he was nothing. With them, he could move a mountain. But he didn't need a mountain. He needed the 24 sheep to be healthy and happy. On the 32nd day, a stranger came to the village. Daniel spotted him from the top of the hill. A man on a horse. Not a soldier, not official, a merchant. Expensive clothes, a fur-lined cloak, leather boots, a well-groomed horse. Daniel watched him go. The merchant stopped at the village headman's house. He spoke with him for half an hour. Then he rode to Daniel's pen. He stopped 10 paces from the fence. He jumped off his horse. He smiled, a broad, white smile. He introduced himself. His name was Torgen, a merchant from the town of Walheim, a cattle dealer. He said he'd heard some interesting things. About the flock in the hollow that never gets sick. About the wool that Master Olden buys. About the young shepherd who does things other shepherds can't. Daniel listened. His face was calm. Torgen walked up to the fence. He looked at the sheep. His eyes were those of a professional. Quick. He assessed them in seconds. He whistled. He said he hadn't seen a flock in such condition in a long time. Then he turned to Daniel. His smile widened. He named a price. 20 gold pieces per head. For the whole flock. 480 gold pieces. Daniel looked at him in silence. Torgen decided that the silence was a bargaining tactic. He raised the price. 25. 600 gold. Daniel said no. Not for sale. Torgen blinked. His smile wavered. He clarified. Not a single head. Daniel confirmed. Not a single one. Torgen paused. The smile returned, but it was different. Harsh. Businesslike. He said that was a lot of money. That a guy with an F rank had never been offered that kind of money. And never would be. Daniel repeated. Not for sale. Torgen nodded, mounted his horse, rode off. Didn't say goodbye. Daniel watched him go. That was the first bell. Rumors spread. Master Alden is selling unusual wool from a small village. Wool of such quality that people are talking about it. And now merchants are coming to see it. So far there was just one. There will be others. He turned to the herd. The count stood nearby, watching the horse ride away. A heavy gaze from beneath his curled horns. Daniel placed his hand on the count's forehead. Hush, you're not going anywhere. 3 days after the merchant's visit, what Daniel had been expecting but wasn't ready for happened. Evening. Daniel sat by the pen, sharpening his shears with a stone. Hana was nearby, feeding the lambs from a bucket. Quiet. Peaceful. Then Knopka raised his head, ears pricked, his body tensed. A second later, Graf raised his head too. He snorted. He stood up. Daniel stood up with him. He listened. Silence. Then a sound. Footsteps, heavy, several pairs of feet, and voices, muffled. 5 men emerged from the grove at the edge of the pasture, not villagers, dressed in dark clothes, knives at their belts. One had a short sword. Their faces were covered with rags. They were heading toward the corral, determined. Daniel assessed the situation in a second. 5 men, armed, heading toward the herd, at night, their faces covered. Not robbers. Robbers wouldn't know where the corral is. They were sent. Torgen, or someone Torgen told. He bought the refusal, decided to take it for free. Daniel looked at Hannah. He quietly told her to go behind the corral, lie down, don't get up until he calls. Hannah turned pale, but she didn't argue. She darted behind the corral, lay down in the grass, disappeared. Daniel turned to the newcomers. He stepped out of the corral, closed the gate behind him. He stood in front of her. The 5 of them stopped 5 paces away. The one in front, the biggest one, he looked at Daniel. He saw a skinny guy in a dirty shirt, barefoot, unarmed. He smirked under his bandana. Daniel could see the smirk in his eyes. The one in front said they wanted the sheep. That was it. He said that if the guy was smart, he'd step aside. No one would get hurt. Daniel didn't move. The one in front sighed. He nodded to the 2 on the left. They went around to the side of the pen. They wanted to climb over. Daniel stepped to the left, quickly, very quickly, so quickly that all 5 of them froze. He was at the side wall before those 2. He stood there and looked at them. The 2 exchanged glances. One pulled out a knife. Daniel looked at the knife. Metal. Dull. Cheap, he thought. He could take that knife and snap it in his fingers. Could grab that man and throw him across the pen. Could do what heroes do in stories. But he wasn't a hero. He was a shepherd, and he thought like a shepherd. A threat to the flock. 5 predators. What does a shepherd do with predators? He doesn't fight. He scares them off. He shows them that an attack will cost more than the prey. He bent down, picked up a rock by the fence, a big one, flat. The very one he used as a salt shaker, 30 kilograms. He lifted it with one hand. He lifted it easily, like a mug. And he hurled it, not at the men, into the ground in front of them. The stone hit the ground with a dull thud. It sank a hand's depth into the trampled earth. The 5 froze. The one with the knife took a step back. Daniel looked at the one in front, calmly, without malice, without fear. The one in front was looking at the stone in the ground, at the dent, at the guy who had just tossed a 30-kilogram stone like a ball with one hand. He was taking stock, a skinny guy, F-rank, barefoot, unarmed, and that rock. The one in front raised his hands, slowly, took a step back, said they'd made a mistake, wrong yard. He turned around. The 5 of them headed back into the grove, quickly, without looking back. Daniel stood there and waited until the footsteps faded away. Then he exhaled. His hands were shaking, not from fatigue, from adrenaline. He wasn't used to this. The predators on the ranch in Montana were coyotes, not people with knives. He called out to Hannah. She emerged from the grass, pale, shaking. Daniel walked over to her. He wanted to say everything was okay, but Hannah clung to his shirt and pressed her face against his chest. She wasn't crying. She just stood there, holding on. Daniel put his hand on her head. He stood there until she stopped shaking. Then he gently pushed her away. He said they needed to check on the flock. The flock was fine. The sheep had huddled together. They were nervous. Graf stood between the flock and the spot where the strangers had been, horns forward, ready to butt. An old, battle-hardened ram. Daniel walked up to him, stroked his muzzle. Good boy, thank you. Graf snorted. Kanopka wriggled out of the pile of lambs and ran to Daniel. He picked her up, held her close, warm, alive, one of his own. He didn't sleep that night. He sat by the pen, listening, watching. They didn't come back. But they would return, or others would come. He understood that. The flock had become noticeable. The wool had become noticeable. The money had become noticeable. The world had begun to look at the hollow. And the world saw a skinny guy with a trashy classroom and wealth he couldn't protect. That's what the world thought. The world was wrong. But Daniel couldn't show his strength to everyone who came. 1 stone is a demonstration. 2 stones are rumors. 3 stones are order recruiters at the doorstep. He needed another kind of protection. In the morning, he thought. He sat on the hilltop and looked down at the valley. A hollow below. Small. Quiet. 3 hills around it like walls. 1 entrance from the south. A spring to the east. A grove to the west. Pastures on the slopes. If you look through a shepherd's eyes, it's a perfect pen. Natural. 3 walls of hills, a single gate, water inside, food inside. All you need to do is close the entrance. Not with a fence, with people. People who have something to protect. He stood up. He walked over to Horlick. The old man was sitting by his house, weaving a basket. Daniel sat down beside him. He said that strangers had come during the night. They wanted to take the flock. Horlick turned pale. His sheep grazed next to Daniel's. If they took one, the other would suffer too. Daniel said they needed to join forces, set up a shared pen up on the hill, to graze together, to guard together. Horlick thought, for a long time. Then he nodded. By evening that day, Daniel had visited 3 more households. Old Martha, who had 4 goats, the widower Bryn, with 5 sheep and a lame donkey, a young family on the outskirts, Neil and his wife. They had 3 goats and a dozen chickens. He told everyone the same thing. They'd come at night. We can't hold them off alone. Together we can. Everyone thought. Everyone agreed. Not because of Daniel. Because of fear. The world beyond the hollow was a dangerous place. The 3rd breakthrough is coming. Bandits on the roads, aristocrats who take whatever they want. Small people always band together in the face of a threat. That's how a herd works. That's how people work. Over the next week, Daniel built a communal pen, a big one, for all the livestock of the small community. His 24 sheep, the Horlikov's 12, Martha's 4 goats, Bryn's 5 sheep and donkey, Neil's 3 goats and chickens. Almost 50 animals, plus the chickens, plus the donkey. The pen stood on the upper slope by the spring, protected on 3 sides, a sturdy fence. Daniel had built it properly. Posts driven deep into the ground, 3 rows of rails, a gate with a bolt, no lock, but it would hold. Hannah assigned the duties, silently, without words. She just started doing it, and the others followed her lead. In the morning, she milked the ewes and distributed the milk. In the afternoon, she watched over the lambs. In the evening, she counted the heads. Old Martha saw how Hannah worked and said the girl was born for the barnyard. Not as an insult, as a compliment. Hannah looked at her and smiled, just a little smiled. Daniel saw that smile, the first one ever. On the 40th day, the morning flock changed. Daniel stood at dawn among the herd and waited. The sun touched the edge of the hill. The lines stretched out. 24. And something else. He froze. A new one appeared among the lines. Thin, faint, but different. Not from a sheep. He looked. Martha's goat. An old white goat with a broken horn. She stood in the pen next to his sheep, and a thread was coming from her. Daniel stood and thought. A goat. Not his goat. He hadn't raised the goat, didn't shear it, didn't treat it. But the goat lived in his pen, drank his water, ate his grass, and stood next to his flock every day. She considered herself part of the flock, and the system counted it that way. He checked. Martha's 4 goats. The thread was from only one, the oldest, the calmest, the one that stood closest to the count, the one that came first when he drove the livestock to the spring. She trusted, not him, the herd. And through the herd, him. Connection, trust. It works not only with sheep. Daniel sat down on the ground. His stats window flashed. He wasn't used to it. It appeared rarely, semi-transparent, at the edge of his vision, as if written in the air. He focused. Read. Class, shepherd, rank F. Charges, 24 sheep, 1 goat. Stat growth depends on the condition of the flock. Below was a line that hadn't been there before. Path of development. Shepherd F. Next step. Cattle herder. Condition. Take at least 30 animals of 3 species under your care. Daniel read it twice. 30 animals, 3 species. He had 24 sheep and 1 goat. 2 species. 25 animals counted. He needed 5 more. And a 3rd species. He looked at Bryn's lame donkey. It was standing in the corner of the pen. Dejected, skinny, ribs sticking out, hooves unshorn, mane matted. Bryn didn't beat him. He just ignored him. The donkey was old and useless. Daniel stood up and walked over to him. The donkey raised his head, ears pricked forward, eyes cloudy, tired. Daniel held out his hand. The donkey sniffed it, warm breath on his palm. Daniel stroked its muzzle. He said quietly, "Hey, it's been a while since your hooves were trimmed." The donkey flattened its ears, then raised them again. It nudged his palm with its nose. Daniel crouched down. He took the donkey's front leg. The hoof was overgrown, cracked, painful. No wonder he's limping. He just needs some care. Daniel took out a knife. He began trimming the hoof, slowly, carefully. The donkey stood still, didn't flinch. Daniel worked and thought. 30 animals, 3 types. Martha's goats, Horlick's sheep, his own sheep, Bryn's donkey, Neil's chickens. The chickens count, probably. He smiled. The path from F to the next level isn't about killing monsters. Not dungeons, not battles. It's 30 healthy animals that trust him. He finished with the donkey's hooves. He combed its mane. He gave it a piece of bread. The donkey chewed and looked at him. Something in that gaze was changing. The cloudy eyes were becoming a little clearer. Tomorrow he would check, to see if the donkey would be of any use. He returned to the pen. Hana was standing by the gate, milk in the buckets. On the 42nd day in the morning, Daniel stood by the pen and waited for dawn. Hana was beside him, Kanopka at his feet. The sun touched the hill. The threads stretched out. 24 sheep, 1 goat, and a new one, slender, heavy, a donkey. Yesterday he trimmed its hooves, brushed its mane, gave it bread, and the donkey began to trust him. 26 strands. Daniel closed his eyes and counted. 4 were missing. And a 3rd kind, chickens. He had never worked with poultry. There were only sheep on the ranch. But the system doesn't ask about experience. The system asks about trust. After breakfast, he went to see Neil, a young man, 25 years old, Class F farmer. His wife, Irie, quiet, thin, pregnant, 3rd month. They live on the outskirts of the village, 3 goats and a dozen chickens. Neil met him at the fence. He looked wary. A month ago, he had laughed at Dan, along with everyone else. Now, Dan had paid off the community debt and scared off the thugs. They'd stopped laughing. But they hadn't had time to get used to it. Daniel said he wanted to help with the goats, for free. Neil frowned. He asked why. Daniel answered simply. He said that healthy goats give more milk. Irie is pregnant. She needs good milk. Neil was silent. Then he looked at his wife. Irie was standing in the doorway. She nodded. Neil stepped back from the fence. Daniel entered the yard. 3 goats. In fair condition. Not bad, but not good either. Their hooves weren't trimmed. Their coats were matted. One of the goats was coughing. Daniel examined her. A dry cough. No nasal discharge. Not an infection. Most likely dust in the barn. The barn where they were standing was dark and dusty. The straw bedding hadn't been changed in months. Ammonia. He could smell it from the doorway. Daniel told Neil they needed to clean out the barn, completely. Remove the old bedding, scrub the floor, lay down fresh straw, and cut a hole in the wall for ventilation. Neil looked at him, said it was a lot of work. Daniel rolled up his sleeves, said he'd help. They cleaned the barn together, half a day. Neil hauled the straw. Daniel scraped the floor. Hana came in uninvited, silently began sweeping. Irie brought out the water. By evening, the barn was clean, fresh straw. The hole in the wall was covered with burlap for filtration. Air. Light. The goats went inside and lay down immediately. The goat that had been coughing stopped coughing on the second day. Daniel trimmed the goats' hooves. He combed their fur. He changed the water in the trough every day. Neil watched, at first with suspicion, then with interest. Then he started helping. He asked questions. Why change the water every day? Why trim the hooves once a month? Why change the bedding every week? Daniel explained, patiently, simply, without arrogance. Clean water means healthy kidneys. Trimmed hooves mean healthy legs. Fresh bedding means healthy lungs. Neil listened and nodded. On the third day, Neil's goats began producing twice as much milk. Aerie came to Daniel with a bowl of porridge. She said thank you. Her eyes were red. She had been crying. Not from grief, from the milk. Because for the past 2 months, she hadn't had enough to eat, and she was afraid her baby would be born weak. And now milk, rich, plenty of it, every day. Daniel took the bowl. He thanked her. He didn't say that the goats could produce even more. He'd say that later. A week after starting to work with Neela's goats and chickens, Daniel checked the strings at dawn. Neela's 3 goats. There were strings, thin, weak, but there were some. 10 chickens. Nothing. The chickens weren't any threads, Daniel thought. The chickens don't know him. He changed their water and added grain, but any owner does that. Chickens aren't individual. They don't look you in the eye. They won't nudge their noses against your palm. They don't lie down at your feet. Maybe the system only counts those capable of individual trust. Sheep, goats, a donkey, maybe horses, dogs, not chickens. Okay, 30 animals. He needs 30 animals of 3 kinds. He has 24 sheep, 4 of Martha's goats, 3 of Neil's goats, a donkey. 32, 3 kinds, sheep, goats, donkeys. But wait, Martha's goats. 1 gave wool, 3 didn't. Neil's goats, 3 gave wool. What's the difference? He wondered. Martha's goats lived in the pen with his sheep, but he didn't tend to them. He fed them, he watered them, but he didn't shear them, didn't brush them, didn't talk to them. Only 1 old goat had joined the flock on her own. He took care of Neil's goats personally. Hands, voice, contact. The system counts not presence but care. Direct, personal, targeted. He returned to Marty's goats, the 3 that didn't give thread. He began working with them. He trimmed their hooves, brushed them, checked their teeth. 1 goat was old and skittish. She wouldn't let him near her. Daniel didn't rush her. He came every day. He sat down nearby. He held a piece of bread in his hand. He waited. On the 4th day, the goat approached. On the 5th, she took the bread from his hand. On the 6th, she let him pet her. On the 7th morning, a thread stretched out from her. 33, 3 types. Condition met. But nothing happened. Daniel waited. For a flash, a sound, a message. Nothing. The system window remained silent. He summoned it with a conscious effort. Semi-transparent lines at the edge of his vision. Class, shepherd, rank F. Wards, 24 sheep, 8. Shepherd, rank F. Wards, 24 sheep, 8 goats, 1 donkey, total 33. Path of development, condition met, evolution available, activate. Daniel blinked. Activate. How? He mentally reached for that word. And the world changed. Not on the outside, on the inside. The threads extending from each animal flared up, not brighter, deeper. He felt each sheep not as a point of warmth, but as a living being with its own character and history. Graph, old, wise, dominant. His threads smelled of earth and stone. Nop, young, curious, trusting. Her thread smelled of milk and fresh grass. Redhead, restless, bold, her thread rang like a stream. Each animal became a separate voice in a chorus he heard with his whole body, and the voices grew louder. Power surged, not like a morning stream, like a river breaking through a dam. Daniel fell to his knees. His hands pressed into the ground. His fingers sank into the earth like butter. Muscles swelled beneath his skin, not roughly, tight, like steel cables beneath thin fabric. He breathed, deeply, slowly. A minute later, the world fell back into place. Daniel stood up. He looked at his hands. The same hands, yet different. He felt each finger as a separate instrument, strength in every joint. He looked at the system window. Class, animal, rank D. A new line. Ability, call of the herd, active. Allows you to direct animals with your voice and will. The radius depends on the strength of the connection. And another line. Aura of peace, passive. Animals within the herder's radius experience less stress. The herd's health increases. Stat output increases. Daniel stood there reading. D rank. He skipped over E, or perhaps E didn't exist for this class. Cattleman. Not a shepherd. Cattleman. Broader. Deeper. Not just sheep. Any livestock. Any animal that recognizes him. He looked at the herd. 33 heads. Each one glowed in his perception. Not through eyes, through something else. He could see their health, their mood, their hunger, their fatigue, like a dashboard, only alive. Hannah stood by the pen and watched him. She sensed something. Not power, not a flash, something else. She said he had changed. Daniel looked at her, asked how. Hannah paused, said he had become quieter, inside. Daniel didn't understand what she meant. Then he did. The aura of peace. Hannah could feel it, not like an animal, like a person near a source of peace. He smiled. An interesting side effect. That same day, he tried the call of the herd. He stood on a hill, the herd below, scattered across the slope. He concentrated, not on the sound, on the connection, on the threads. And he called, not with his voice, with his will, to me. 33 heads raised their muzzles at once, turned toward him, and came, calmly. The day after the class evolution, Daniel woke up a different person, not on the outside. His body remained the same, a skinny 17-year-old boy. But inside, everything had been rebuilt. The morning influx from the 33 animals was 3 times stronger than yesterday. The aura of peace was working constantly. He felt it as a light vibration in his chest. Warm, steady. The animals felt it too. The herd had calmed down. The sheep that used to get nervous during shearing now stood still. Marta's goats, which used to fight at the trough, were now eating in turn. Even Brinna's donkey had stopped standing in the corner and come out to the herd. He stood next to Graf and nibbled at the grass. Graf didn't mind. But Daniel wasn't thinking about strength. He was thinking about what had happened that night. 5 armed men had come for his herd. He scared them off. Once. Torgen isn't a fool. He'll realize that a stone means nothing. 1 strong guy isn't protection. 10 bandits aren't 5. And if it's not a bandit who comes, but an aristocrat with a squad of knights, then a stone won't help. He needs people. Not just neighbors who've herded their cattle into a common pen. People who will stand by his side, who have something to lose, who are bound not by fear, but by a common cause. And he needs someone who knows how to fight, because he doesn't know how. He's a shepherd, not a warrior. His strength is meaningless without skill. He can lift a bull, but he doesn't know how to dodge a sword. On the 50th day after waking up, he heard a commotion by the village well. Shouts, swearing. Kana ran to see what was happening. She returned a minute later, pale. She said there was a woman lying by the well, a stranger, beaten. Daniel went over. A crowd had gathered at the well. about 20 people. They stood in a semicircle and watched. A woman lay on the ground, young, tall, red hair, blood on her face. Her shirt was torn, a burn on her shoulder, old, scarring, fresh scrapes on her hands. One leg was twisted unnaturally, a dislocation or a fracture. She was conscious. Her eyes were open, green, angry. She looked up at the crowd like a cornered cat. The priest stood in front, his hands folded on his stomach. He said that strangers had no place here, that the village was no shelter for vagabonds, that she should go back where she came from. The woman tried to stand up. Her leg wouldn't hold her. She fell back down. She clenched her teeth. She didn't groan. Daniel pushed through the crowd. People parted. He crouched down next to the woman. He looked at her leg. Her ankle was swollen, blue, dislocated, not broken. She was lucky. He looked into her eyes. He asked if she could walk if he helped her. She looked at him, assessing him. A skinny guy, barefoot, dirty shirt, but his eyes were calm. She nodded. Daniel offered his shoulder. She grabbed hold, heavy, a head taller than him. But his strength was the strength of 33 animals at dawn. He lifted her easily. She felt it. She looked at him more intently. She said nothing. He led her toward the corral. The priest shouted after them that Dan was taking responsibility for the stranger. Daniel didn't turn around. At the corral, he sat her down on the straw. Hana brought water, a rag. Daniel washed the scrapes. He examined her ankle. A dislocation. It needed to be set. He looked at the woman. He warned her it would hurt. She nodded. She clenched her teeth. He took her leg in both hands. He set it in one motion, quickly, precisely, just like he used to set joints on lambs at the ranch. The woman flinched, exhaled, didn't scream. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't scream. Daniel wrapped her ankle with a strip of cloth, tightly, but not too tight. He took some sheep fat out of the sack. He rubbed it on the burn on her shoulder, an old burn. It was several months old, but the skin was still tight and dry. The fat would soften it. The woman sat and watched him work. Then she said, "You treat people like animals." Daniel looked up, smiled, said the principle was the same. Clean wound, proper immobilization, rest, food, time. The woman snorted, the first sound resembling a laugh. Hana brought milk and bread. The woman ate greedily, like Hana on the first day, like a person who hadn't eaten properly in a long time. Daniel waited until she finished. Then he asked her name. Sadie. Sadie McCoy. Daniel asked where she was from. Sadie fell silent, for a long time. Then she spoke, briefly, stiltedly, like a report. Order of the Silver Spear. Novice. C-rank paladin. 6 months ago, a mission on the northern border. A clash with a twisted one. A squad of 8. The commander ordered her to finish off a captured enemy scout. She refused. The commander struck her. She struck back. The squad left her on the battlefield, with a burn from a magical strike, with a broken face, without weapons, without food. For 6 months, she walked south, alone, without an order rank, without documents, without money. She ate whatever she could find. She slept wherever she could. She twisted her ankle 2 days ago on a mountain trail. She crawled the last few miles, to the first shelter, to the well. Daniel listened. He was silent. When she finished, he was silent too. Then he asked one thing. He asked if she could count. Sadie blinked. She hadn't expected that question. She said she could. Daniel nodded. He said he needed someone to count the lambs in the mornings. There were 23 of them. Small, nimble. They scatter. Hana can't keep up on her own. Sadie looked at him for a long time. She was a C-rank paladin. She'd fought the twisted. She'd broken the bones of the undead. And this skinny, barefoot guy was asking her to count lambs. She opened her mouth, closed it. Then she said, "Okay." Daniel nodded. He stood up. He went to milk the ewe. Sadie stayed on the straw. Kanapka came over and lay down next to her. Sadie looked at the lamb. She reached out her hand. Kanopka nudged her palm with her nose. Sadie stroked her. Her hand was big, rough, accustomed to a spear, but she stroked it gently. Hannah stood by the trough and watched. Her eyes were wary. A new person, a stranger, big, noisy. Hannah didn't like strangers, but Kanopka trusted him, and Hannah trusted Kanopka. Sadie was treated for 3 weeks. Her leg was healing. The scrapes had closed up. The burn, treated with sheep, became softer. Daniel changed the bandages every day. He made broth from bones. Hannah brought milk. Kanopka slept right by Sadie's side. For the first few days, Sadie tried to help. She was eager to carry heavy things, chop wood, build. Each time, Daniel calmly took the axe or bucket from her and gave her a mug of milk or a tuft of wool to comb instead. Sadie was angry. She said she wasn't a cripple. Daniel said her leg would heal faster if she didn't strain it. Sadie fell silent. She drank the milk. She combed the wool. She was angry. In the second week, she started counting the lambs. In the morning, just as Daniel had asked. 23. She stood by the pen on one leg, leaning on a stick, and she counted. Then she counted them again, then a third time. She went over to Daniel. She reported, 23, all accounted for. One is limping, left hind leg. Daniel went to check. It wasn't a lamb that was limping, a young ewe, a pebble between her toes, just like Nopka on the first day. He pulled out the pebble. The ewe ran off. Sadie watched. Her eyes were attentive. By the third week, she was already walking without a stick. Her leg had healed. The burn hardly bothered her. She chopped wood, carried water, she repaired the fence. She worked silently and fiercely, like a person who was used to repaying a debt with labor. Daniel didn't interfere. Work is her language. Let her speak. But he noticed the moment when something changed. Evening. Sadie sat by the fire and sharpened a knife. Daniel was nearby, knotting a rope fence for the pen. Hannah slept in the straw with Kanopka. Quiet. Peaceful. Sadie stopped. She looked at Daniel. She asked why he wasn't afraid. Daniel asked what. Sadie said everything. Bandits, the priest, the village elders, the world that decided he was trash. Daniel thought for a moment. He said he was afraid. Every day. Afraid that the lamb would die during the night, that the ewe wouldn't give birth, that the spring would run dry. But he wasn't afraid of people. 2 months after waking up, a flock of 35, 2 new ewes bought at the fair in the county town. Daniel rode with Horlick in his wagon. He took his time choosing. He examined every sheep at the fair. Teeth, hooves, wool, eyes, temperament. Out of 40 sheep for sale, he took 2. The seller was offended. He asked what was wrong with the rest. Daniel didn't bother to explain. The 2 new ewes went through a 2-week quarantine in a separate section of the pen. Daniel checked on them every day. Both are healthy. Both gave lambs on the 5th day. Quickly, faster than he expected. The aura of peace accelerated the bonding process. The animals around him relaxed. They trusted him faster. The bond formed not over a week, but over days. The morning influx of 35 animals was powerful. Daniel felt as if a motor were running inside him. Quiet, steady, powerful. He didn't know his exact stats in numbers. The system only showed class, rank, and a list of charges. But he knew by feel. He was stronger than any man in the village. Stronger than any man in the county town. Probably stronger than most D-rank warriors and many C-rank ones. And he grew stronger every day, because every day his herd grew healthier. On the 15 days, Che-Rin Park arrived in the hollow. A small woman in dusty clothes carrying 2 huge bags. Round mountain crystal glasses perched on her nose. Her hair was pulled back into a tight knot at the nape of her neck. A dozen pouches of dried herbs hung from her belt. She had walked all the way from Chungyang province, a 3-week journey. She had been selling tinctures and ointments in the villages. Herbalist Yerang, a nobody, just like a shepherd. She entered the village, spread out a rag in the square by the well, laid out the bottles. People approached. They bought little. Herbalist Yerang is no doctor. She's just hocus pocus, grandma's potions. Few people believe in them. Daniel saw her from the hill. He came down, not because he was sick, because he saw the bags. Herbs. He walked over, looked at the goods laid out, asked what was in that bottle. Cheyrin looked up. She saw a barefoot guy with sheep's wool in his hair. She answered professionally. Silver moss root tincture. Helps with headaches and fever. Daniel nodded. He asked about the next one. Cheyrin answered. He asked about the third, the fourth, the fifth. He asked about every vial, every little bag, every dried stem. Cheyrin answered. First briefly, then in more detail, then enthusiastically. No one had ever asked her about every single herb. No one had listened. No one had remembered. This guy listened. He remembered. And he asked questions that made her eyes widen. He asked if any of her herbs had a high zinc or selenium content. Cheyrin didn't know those words. Daniel explained it another way. He asked if there was an herb that made animals' fur grow faster and thicker. Cheyrin thought for a moment. She reached into her bag. She pulled out a bunch of dry grass with bluish leaves. She said that in her province, they add this grass to horse feed before winter. It keeps the horses from shedding, and their coats become thicker. Daniel took the bunch. He sniffed it. He rubbed a leaf between his fingers. Bluish, it bitter. He had seen this grass, in the pasture. The nameless blue grass he'd noticed on the first day. It grew among the clover and sweet clover. The sheep were eating it. That's why they had such a thick undercoat. This grass was the local equivalent of something that stimulates hair follicle growth, a natural feed supplement. He looked at Cheyrin. She was looking at him. Behind her glasses, her eyes were round and shining, like an owl that had spotted something interesting. Daniel asked if she wanted to see his flock. Cheyrin folded up the cloth with the goods in 3 seconds. They climbed the hill. Cheyrin saw the flock and stopped. 35 head on the green slope. Silvery wool, clean water, fresh grass, a pen with a shelter and a feeding trough. Order, cleanliness, health. She stood and watched. Then she looked at Daniel. She said it was the best herd she had seen in 3 years of wandering. Daniel thanked her. Then he took 3 bundles of herbs he had gathered in the pasture out of his bag. He laid them out in front of her. He asked what she knew about each of them. Cheyrin sat down on the ground. Ah took a notebook out of her bag. A real one, paper and ink, a rarity in the village. She began to write. They talked until evening. Daniel shared what he knew from his past life. Not directly, without mentioning Montana or his master's degree. He simply shared his observations. That this herb helps with hoof rot if made into a poultice. That this one reduces fever in lambs if brewed and given with milk. That this one might be poisonous in large quantities, but in small amounts stimulates the appetite. Cheyrin wrote down every word. Her eyes were ablaze. She asked questions, precise, intelligent, professional. She wasn't some village herbalist. She was a true specialist in a world that didn't value her expertise. That evening, Daniel offered her tea. He brewed it from the herbs she herself sold. She drank and remained silent. Then she said she had a question. Could she stay? For a few days. She wanted to study the herbs in the pasture, compile a catalog, test their properties. Daniel said she could stay, not just for a few days, for good. He had a problem. 35 head of cattle. Soon there would be more. He needed a veterinarian. More precisely, he needed someone who knew the local herbs and could make medicine for the animals from them, because his knowledge from another world was useless without local ingredients, and her knowledge of local herbs was useless without an understanding of exactly what needed to be treated and how. Together, they would both sides. Chaerin sat and looked at him. The tea was getting cold in the mug. Then she said that during her 3 years of wandering, people had called her a witch doctor, a charlatan, a useless herbalist. Not once had she been called a doctor. Daniel said they would be now. Chaerin adjusted her glasses. She took out a notebook. She said that in that case, she needed a place for a lab. Daniel pointed to an empty shed behind the corral. Chaerin looked at the shed. She nodded. By the next morning, the shed was hers. Bags were laid out. Herbs hung on ropes. A mortar and pestle sat on the table. The notebook was open to a blank page. Dr. Park began her work. Chaerin spent the next 2 weeks in the pasture, from dawn until dusk. She gathered herbs. She took notes, classifying. Daniel walked with her, showing her what the sheep ate, what they didn't eat, what they ate greedily, what they avoided. Chaerin recorded every observation in her notebook. By the end of the second week, she had a catalog of 32 local plants, with descriptions, with drawings, with notes on their properties. Daniel asked her to make 3 things. First, an ointment for hoof rot made from local herbs. Second, a decoction to boost the lamb's immunity. Third, a feed supplement made from bluegrass to improve the quality of the wool. Chaerin worked for a week. She tried. She made mistakes. She tried again. The ointment was ready on the 4th day. Green, thick. It had a sharp smell. Daniel applied it to the hoof of a ewe that was starting to get inflamed. 2 days later, the inflammation was gone. Chaerin wrote down the recipe. She circled it. Daniel saw her face at that moment. Quiet pride. A small victory, but a huge one for her. For the first time, her herbs had cured not a human headache, but a real problem in an animal. And it worked. Sadie watched Chaerin with cautious interest. By the 3rd month, things were moving faster. Wool, milk, cheese, Chaerin's ointments. The valley began to produce. Daniel wasn't in a hurry, but the money was flowing in. Master Alden took every ounce of wool. He paid 2 gold pieces per pound, consistently, no haggling. The milk went to the village, for free. Daniel didn't charge the neighbors for the milk. Horlick, Neil, Martha, Bryn, other families. They came with jugs. Hannah poured it out. At first they were shy, then they got used to it. Then they started bringing something in return. Bread, eggs, turnips, honey. Not money, barter. Good old-fashioned village barter. Daniel accepted it. He thanked them. He never refused. And he never asked. People saw that. By the middle of the 3rd month, Lushina had changed. Not on the outside, on the inside. Before, the village had been a collection of separate yards, everyone fending for themselves. Now they had a shared pen, a shared herd, a shared person to turn to if a goat limped or a ewe couldn't give birth. Daniel became the center, not a leader, not a village elder, the center. Like a spring on a hillside, he doesn't give orders, he just is, and everyone comes to him. On the 90th day, a carriage drove into the hollow. Daniel saw it from the hill, a fine one, well-groomed horses, a coachman in livery on the box. A girl stepped out of the carriage, young, fair-haired, in a traveling dress made of fine fabric. Behind her, a maid with a trunk. The girl looked around. She saw the dirty village, houses with thatched roofs, manure on the path. She pursed her lips. Then she saw the hill, a herd on the slope, silver-colored wool. And she started up the hill. Daniel came down to meet her. She stopped, looked at him, at his dirty shirt, at his bare feet, at his hands covered in sheep fat. She introduced herself. Emma Sutherland, daughter of Baron Sutherland, a Class B seamstress. Daniel wasn't surprised by the rank. He was surprised that the Baron's daughter had come to Ravine. Emma spoke quickly, with a slight gasp. She was nervous, trying to hide it. She said she'd heard about the wool, the extraordinary wool from a small village. Master Alden sold a batch to the capital. The tailors went wild. They'd never seen such fiber. She's a seamstress, the best in the province, perhaps the best in the kingdom. Her work sells in the capital for sums that make aristocrats pale. But she needs material, real material, and she came to find it. Daniel listened. Then he silently untied the sack. He took out the fleece, the best, with a silvery undercoat. He placed it in her hands. Emma fell silent. Her fingers touched the wool. Slender, long, the fingers of a master. She closed her eyes, ran her palm along the fiber, slowly, like a blind person reading a face. Then she opened her eyes. Tears welled up in them. Daniel waited. Emma said she had never, not once in her life, held anything like this in her hands. Daniel nodded. He said it was a standard shearing, not the best. The best would be in 3 months, when the undercoat had grown to full length, and he'd have time to adjust the diet according to the Che-Rin protocol. Emma looked at him as if he were crazy, or a genius. She couldn't decide. Then she asked how much he wanted for the batch. Daniel asked what batch. Emma said she wanted all the wool he produced. All of it. Any amount. She would sew with it and pay him a percentage of the sales. Daniel thought about it. It was a good offer. But he looked at her expensive dress, at her manicured hands, at the wagon down below. He asked why she really needed it. Emma fell silent for a long time. The maid shifted from foot to foot. Emma dismissed her with a gesture. The maid went to the carriage. Emma stood on the hillside. The wind ruffled her light hair. Then she spoke, quietly, without a sigh, without aristocratic affectation, in an ordinary voice. She said she had run away. Her father wanted to marry her off to a wine merchant, a fat man, 50 years old, rich, to pay off the family's debts. She refused. Her father said that being a seamstress was a disgrace for a baron's daughter, that the only use for her was a profitable marriage. She packed her things at night. She took the maid who refused to abandon her. She took a trunk with her tools and left 3 weeks ago. She heard about the wool from Alden. She came, not for the wool, for an opportunity, for a place where no one would tell her that her talent was a disgrace. Daniel listened, a familiar story. Different words, a different scale. But the essence was the same. The world said you were useless. The world was wrong. He handed her the fleece. Said the first batch was free. Let her show what she can do. Then they'd talk about money. Emma took the fleece, pressed it to her chest, nodded. Then she looked around. At the pen, at the herd, at Hana by the water trough, at Sadie with her stick by the gate, at the smoke from Charin's barn, at Button, who ran up and sniffed her shoes. Emma bent down. She stroked Kanopka. Her hands were shaking, not from the cold. Daniel pretended not to notice. Emma was put up in Martha's house. The old woman rented her a room for a gold coin a month. Emma didn't haggle. The maid left on the 3rd day. She was scared of country life. She went back to the city. Emma stayed, alone, without a maid, without a carriage. She sold the carriage to the coachman. She put the money in a chest. She laid out her tools in Martha's room. Threads, needles, scissors, thimbles, measuring tapes, patterns, all professional grade, expensive, well-maintained. On the 5th day, Emma came to the corral with her first finished piece, a scarf, made from Daniel's silver-colored wool. She spun it herself, in the evenings, on a small spinning wheel she'd brought in her trunk. She spun and wove and knitted. 5 days, the scarf was done. Daniel didn't know the word. He'd seen scarves. Back on the ranch, his mother used to knit scarves from their own wool, nice ones, warm ones, but this was different. Emma's scarf was weightless, soft as a cloud, warm as a campfire, and it glowed, not magically, literally. The silvery thread in Emma's weave caught the light and reflected it with a soft glow, like a moonstone. Daniel held the scarf in his hands and said nothing. Hannah approached. She touched it. Her eyes widened. Sadie looked and whistled. Che-Rin came out of the shed. She adjusted her glasses. She said it could be sold for a fortune. Emma stood and waited. She blushed. She fiddled with the hem of her dress. She waited for his assessment. Daniel looked up. He looked at her. He said it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen in his life. Emma blushed even more. Then she straightened up, lifted her chin, smiled. The first real smile since she'd arrived. Daniel said they wouldn't sell the scarf. Emma was surprised. Daniel turned to Hana, draped the scarf around her neck, wrapped it, gently, carefully. Hana froze. The scarf glowed against her slender neck, silvery, warm. Hana raised her hand and touched it. Her fingers trembled. She looked at Daniel, at Emma, at the scarf. And for the first time in all the time Daniel had known her, Hana Lee began to cry, silently, without a sound. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she stood there without wiping them away, because both her hands were holding the scarf. Emma looked at her, and she was crying too. Sadie turned away, but Daniel saw her wipe her eyes. 4th month, a flock of 40. 5 new lambs had been born in the past few weeks, all healthy, all strong. Daniel attended every birth personally, even if it was 3 in the morning, even if it was raining. He would get up and go to the pen. Hannah followed him, without words, without asking. She just got up and went, holding a lantern. She handed him rags. The morning rush from the 40-head herd turned Daniel into something he couldn't define. He could hold a bull with one hand. He could run faster than a horse over short distances. He could go without sleep for 2 days and not feel tired until the evening of the 2nd day. But on the outside, he was the same skinny guy. The aura of tranquility concealed him. People around him relaxed. They didn't notice. They didn't sense a threat. He looked like a shepherd, smelled like a shepherd, moved like a shepherd, slowly, smoothly, without sudden movements. No one saw him as a warrior. No one sensed his power. Except Sadie. Sadie saw it. She was a C-rank paladin, trained to sense mana and power. And one morning at dawn, when Daniel stood among the herd and was drawing in the flow, Sadie stood 20 paces away and watched. Then she... quietly. She said she could see it, that a wave was emanating from him, like from a high-ranking knight, maybe higher. She asked what he was. Daniel looked at her, he thought. Then he told the truth. Not all of it, but enough. He said that his class didn't work the way everyone thought, that the herd gave him strength, that the healthier the herd, the stronger he, that without the herd, he's just an ordinary guy. Sadie listened. Her face was stony. Then she nodded. She said she understood now, why he doesn't leave, why he doesn't go to the city, why every morning before dawn he's in the pen. He doesn't choose to be a shepherd. He has to be a shepherd. His strength is his responsibility, literally. Daniel nodded. Sadie was silent for a moment. Then she said that, in that case, she would stand between him and anyone who tried to take him away. Or his herd. Daniel said he hadn't asked her to do that. Sadie said he didn't need to. She'd decided on her own. She stood tall and straight, red hair blowing in the wind, a scar across her eyebrow, green eyes, not a shadow of doubt. Daniel nodded. Thank you. Sadie nodded back. She went off to chop wood. Later that same day, as evening approached, horsemen appeared on the southern trail, 5 of them, in armor, with coats of arms. Daniel saw them from the hill. The coats of arms were unfamiliar. No, his body's memory prompted him. A stylized bear in a red circle. Baron Raynor's coat of arms, the owner of the neighboring fief, a blood knight of the B rank. Sadie stood beside him, her hand on her belt. She had no weapon. The order had taken her spear. No sword, only a knife. But she stood as if she held all the weapons in the world in her hand. The horsemen rode up to the corral. They dismounted. 4 soldiers, 1 officer. Young, arrogant, with a silver chain around his neck. The officer looked at Daniel, at Sadie, at the corral, at the herd. He spoke. His lordship, Baron Gustav Rainer, has learned of the ranch in Loshchina. His lordship is impressed. His lordship offers his protection in exchange for a share of the herd. Half. Daniel listened. His face was calm. Half the herd. 20 head. Just like that. for protection, which he hadn't asked for. He said no. The officer raised an eyebrow, said this wasn't an offer they made twice. Daniel repeated, no. The officer fell silent. He scanned the corral, the herd, the girls, Che-Rin's barn. He took it all in. Then he nodded, said he'd relay the answer to his lordship. He turned around, mounted his horse. The 5 of them rode off. Sadie watched them go. She said that was bad. Raynor wasn't the type to take no for an answer. Daniel knew that. He'd seen it dozens of times in his past life. Big ranches that wanted to swallow up the small ones. Corporations that squeezed farmers off their land. The same old routine. First an offer, then pressure, then coercion. He needed to be prepared. The next morning, he gathered everyone. Hana, Sadie, Cha-Rin, Emma. They sat by the corral. Daniel spoke, calmly, point by point. Raynor will return, not alone. He'll send people, maybe in a week, maybe in a month. The valley is small, remote. The law here is whoever has the most swords. We need to be ready. Sadie said she needed a weapon, a spear, or at least a sword. Daniel nodded, said he'd buy one at the next fair. Cha-Rin said she could make smoke pouches, a herbal mixture, acrid smoke. Doesn't kill, but blinds for a minute. Daniel nodded. Emma was silent. Then she said quietly that she could write a letter to her father, Baron Sutherland. He's fallen on hard times, but he has connections, a name. Raynor won't attack land under another baron's protection. Daniel looked at her. He asked if it was dangerous for her, if her father found out where she was. Emma pressed her lips together. She said it was dangerous, but better dangerous than dead. Daniel nodded. He asked her to wait with the letter, for now. There's another way. Hana was silent. Everyone was silent. Then Hana said quietly that the village would help. Everyone looked at her. Hana said the village had changed. People come for milk every day. Horlick, Neil, Martha, Bryn, others. Their livestock is in the communal pen. Their children drink milk from Daniel's sheep. If Raynor comes for the flock, he'll come for their milk too. They won't stand by. Daniel looked at Hana. She didn't look up. Her cheeks were red, but her voice was firm. He smiled. He said she was right. Sadie looked at Hana with respect for the first time. Daniel stood up. He said the plan was simple. Keep working. The flock must grow. The wool must be sold. The village must grow rich. The stronger the ravine, the harder it is for Raynor to crush it quietly. And he won't want to do it loudly. Because loud means attention. The guild, the county, maybe the crown. An aristocrat doesn't need a fuss over how he takes a village shepherd's flock. The next 3 weeks were spent working. Daniel expanded the flock. He bought 3 more ewes and a young ram. The ram was fine, strong, young, 2 years old, powerful horns. His fleece wasn't silvery like the locals, but thick and heavy, fresh blood. Daniel named him Prince. The Count looked at Prince and didn't approve. He snorted. He thrust out his horns. The 2 rams stood facing each other. Daniel stepped between them. He placed one hand on the Count's forehead, the other on Prince's. Quiet, both of them. The rams froze, an aura of calm. They relaxed. They backed off. They didn't fight. A week later, they walked side by side. Not friends, but not enemies either. A herd of 45. The rams were divided into groups, some under the Count, some under the Prince. Selection. In a year, the best could be selected from their offspring. In 2 years, the flock would be genetically stronger. In 3. Daniel didn't plan 3 years ahead. He planned for the next dawn, for the next lambing, for the next shearing. Small steps, one after another, like sheep climbing a slope, slowly, but upward. On the 100th day, another stranger came to the village. Small, shaggy, dirty, about 15 years old, with darting eyes and quick hands. Daniel spotted her as she tried to pull a wheel of cheese out of the storeroom behind the pen. He stood behind her and waited for her to turn around. She turned around, saw him, froze, cheese in her hand, eyes wide. Daniel asked if she was hungry. The girl didn't answer. She was getting ready to run. Daniel didn't move. He asked her name. Silence. He asked where she was from. Silence. He asked where she was going. Silence. Daniel nodded. He said she could take the cheese, but next time she should ask. He had plenty of cheese. The girl blinked. She hadn't expected that. Daniel turned and walked back toward the pen. A minute later, he heard footsteps behind him, light, quick, cautious. The girl was following him, like a stray cat, keeping her distance, ready to run at any moment. Daniel didn't turn around. He sat down by the pen. He took out the bread. He broke it in half. He placed one half on the rock next to him. He started eating his half. A minute later, the bread on the rock was gone. The girl was sitting 3 steps away from him, chewing, looking at him from under her brows. Daniel said the dogs wouldn't let her steal it, so she'd have to be honest. The girl stopped chewing, swallowed, said, "Lizzie." Daniel nodded, asked if she had anyone. Lizzie shook her head. Asked where she was going. Lizzie shrugged. Nowhere. Daniel said that in that case, she should stay. Konopka walked over to Lizzie, sniffed her, nuzzled her knee. Lizzie looked at the lamb, reached out her hand. Konopka licked her fingers. Lizzie froze. An expression appeared on her dirty face that Daniel knew well. The look of someone touching something alive, warm, and harmless for the first time in a long while. Lizzie stayed. A first-rate F-rank thief. Trash. Like a shepherd. Like an herb gatherer. The world didn't know what to do with her. Abandoned her. Forgot her. She clung to the hollow like a lamb clings to a flock. Not by choice, by instinct. Here they feed her. Here they don't beat her. Here she can sleep without fear. Hana gave her a blanket, silently. She laid it next to Konopka in the hayloft. Lizzie lay down. Konopka snuggled up to her. Lizzie hugged the lamb. She closed her eyes. A minute later, she was asleep. Sadie stood at the entrance and watched. Then she looked at Daniel. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The 5th month. Autumn had come to Hollow with cold mornings and yellow grass on the slopes. Daniel had rearranged the schedule. The herd now went out to pasture later, when the dew had dried. Wet grass means wet hooves. Wet hooves mean fungus. Fungus means loss. He couldn't afford that. 45 head. Every one counts. Cheirin had finished making a new ointment for skin fungus. It worked. Daniel tested it on 2 sheep that were starting to show irritation between their toes. Clear in 3 days. Cheirin wrote the recipe in her notebook and circled it with a double line. Emma sewed, every day, from morning till night. In Martha's room stood a small loom that she had assembled herself from poles and ropes. She wove silver wool into a thread so fine that Daniel couldn't believe it. Then she wove. Then she sewed. The first scarf for Hana was a trial run. The second piece was a sensation. A cloak, light, warm, silver, with a hood. Emma brought it to Daniel, unfolded it. Daniel touched the fabric, thinner than paper, but warm, and that same moonlight sheen. He draped the cloak over his shoulders, weightless, as if there were nothing there, but warm, as if you were standing by a fire. Emma said that in the capital, a cloak like this would go for 50 gold pieces, at least. Daniel whistled. Then he thought. He said that half the money was for Emma, half for the general fund. Emma shook her head. She said a third would be enough for her. Let the rest go to the herd. Daniel didn't argue. Master Alden came to Hollow himself, for the first time. an old wool merchant who hadn't left the city in 40 years. He arrived in a creaky wagon, alone, without guards. Daniel met him on the trail. Alden climbed down from the cart. He looked at the hill, at the herd, at the corral, at the people. He was silent for a long time. Then he said he wanted to see the cloak. Emma showed it to him. Alden took the cloak. He held it up to the light. His fingers ran over the fabric. Professional, quick. Then he put the cloak down and looked at Daniel. He said he wanted to offer a contract, an exclusive one. All the wool from the hollow would go through him. He would handle sales to the capital, all the contacts, all expenses. His cut was 15%. Daniel thought it over. 15% was fair. Alden wasn't greedy. He understood that greed would kill the goose that laid the golden eggs. Daniel agreed. They shook hands. Alden left with 2 sacks of wool and Emma's cloak. A month later, the cloak was sold in the capital. Not for 50 gold pieces, for 120. The Duchess of Valmore bought it, in person, at an auction. Alden brought the money and a letter. The Duke's wife wanted more. 3 cloaks, 2 dresses, 6 scarves for the winter ball. Emma read the letter. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from the scale of it all. Daniel told her not to rush. Quality matters more than speed. Emma nodded, exhaled, went to work. Lizzie had settled in over the past month. She was quick, deft. Her hands were nimble. She learned to milk in 2 days, to count the lambs in 3. By the 5th day, she was already running up the slope after Redhead, who had wandered off again. Lizzie caught her, dragged her back. Redhead bleated indignantly. Lizzie stuck her tongue out at her. Daniel watched and smiled. Button followed Lizzie around like a shadow. They slept together in the hayloft, ate together, ran together. Lizzie talked to Button all the time. She told her about the port city she came from, about the streets, about the market, about the ships. Button listened, chewed, blinked. Lizzie said that Button was the only one who listened to her. Hannah heard that. She walked over, sat down silently beside them. Lizzie looked at her. Hannah didn't say anything. She just sat there. A minute later, Lizzie continued her story, now to both of them. Hannah listened. Button chewed. Daniel stood by the pen and watched them. 2 girls and a lamb. 3 creatures the world didn't want, who found each other in a small valley between 3 hills. On the 115th day, what D. Daniel had been waiting for. Dawn. The flood. 45 threads, and among them, 1 new one. Not from a sheep, not from a goat, not from a donkey. He looked around. There were 46 threads. The last one came from Kanopka, but not an ordinary one. Kanopka stood next to him, and her thread was different, brighter, deeper, thicker. Daniel crouched down. He looked at her. Kanopka had grown, no longer a lamb, a young, vibrant lamb, 5 months old, strong, healthy, silvery fleece, amber eyes, the very same lame lamb he'd rescued from trouble on the first day. Her thread gave off more than the counts, much more. Daniel closed his eyes. He counted. The flow from Kanopka was like that of 10 healthy threads, maybe more. Because Button isn't just a healthy sheep. Button is the first animal he saved in this world, the first one he gave a name to, the first one that lay down at his feet and stayed. A bond, not just trust, affection, love, if that word applies to a sheep. Daniel placed his hand on her head. Kanopka nudged his palm with her nose. Warm, alive, his. The system window flashed. A new line. Bonds of the First Companion. Konopka recognized as the shepherd's first companion. The 6th month, winter. The first snow had settled on the 3 hills like a thin, white blanket. Daniel had been preparing for winter since the first day of autumn. The pen was insulated. The walls were plastered with clay. The cracks were stuffed with woolen rags. The shed was reinforced. The roof was covered with a double layer of straw. Inside, it was dry and warm. 45 head. There is no pasture in winter. The herd stands in the pen. They eat the hay he'd prepared. Daniel had mowed the hay all autumn, alone. Sadie helped. The 2 of them mowed 2 slopes. Hannah and Lizzie dried and stacked it. The haystacks stood around the pen like little fortresses. It will last until spring. Charin prepared a bag of dried herbs for feed supplements. Bluegrass, dried, chopped. A handful per head per day. The wool kept growing, thick, warm, silvery. Winter wool is better than summer wool. Denser, thicker undercoat. Daniel knew this from the ranch. Winter is when the wool gains strength. Emma worked non-stop. 3 coats, 2 dresses, 6 scarves, an order from the Duke's wife. She sewed by candlelight. Her fingers were freezing. Daniel noticed. He brought her fingerless gloves. He knitted them himself, from Konopki wool, soft, warm. Emma put them on and looked at him. She blushed. She said, "Thank you." Her voice was quiet. Daniel nodded and left. Emma watched him go. Hannah saw it. Hannah saw everything. On the 130th day, real winter came. Frost, wind from the north, snow up to the knees. Daniel spent the night in the pen, every night, among the sheep. They kept him warm, and he kept them warm. A mutual exchange. The morning rush in the frost was stronger than in summer. He didn't understand why. Then he understood. In winter, the animals are completely dependent on the shepherd. In summer, they can go out to pasture, find water on their own. In winter, without him, they will die. Dependence deepens trust. Trust strengthens the flow. Winter is the time when the shepherd proves that he is a shepherd. Not with words, with deeds. Every morning, every trough is filled. Every trough is unfrozen. Every sheep is checked. Every lamb is sheltered. That is strength, not muscles, not rank. The routine of care, day after day. That winter, a tragedy struck. Not with the flock, with Emma. One morning, Emma came to the pen, eyes red, face stony, a small bundle in her hands. Daniel asked what had happened. Emma said one word, Misty. Misty was a cat, old, striped, the only creature Emma had taken from her father's castle. The cat who had slept with her since childhood, who had traveled in a trunk across 3 provinces, who had fallen asleep on her lap every evening while Emma sewed. Misty had died during the night, quietly, in her sleep. Old age. Emma stood holding the bundle. She didn't cry. She held herself together, like a lady, back straight, chin up. Daniel looked at her, then at the bundle, then said nothing. That night he sat by the hearth in the barn, alone. Before him lay a ball of wool, the best, silvery beneath coat, from his personal stash. Konopka's wool, the softest, the finest. He picked up the needles, rough, wooden, made from twigs, and began to knit. He didn't know how to knit beautifully, not like Emma. His hands were a shepherd's hands, rough, strong, accustomed to manure and blood, not to thread and needles. But he tried, row by row, stitch by stitch, all night long. By dawn, a blanket lay on his lap, small, not for a person, for a cat. A bit crooked, not perfect, but soft, warm, silvery. In the morning, he went to Martha's house. Emma was sitting at the table. In front of her was a small hole in the frozen ground behind the house. Ready. Misty lay in a bundle nearby. Daniel silently placed the blanket in front of Emma. She looked at him. At the blanket. She touched it. She recognized the wool. She looked up. He saw the question in her eyes. She asked if he remembered her name. Daniel nodded. Misty. Emma took the blanket, pressed it to her face, and cried. For the first time in front of someone since she ran away from home. Quietly, bitterly, like someone who had held on for too long and finally allowed themselves to let go. Daniel stood beside her. He didn't hug her. He didn't offer words of comfort. He just stood there. Because sometimes that's all you need. For someone to stand by your side and not leave. In the doorway behind him stood Hannah and Sadie and Che-Rin and Lizzie. Hannah cried silently. Sadie stood with a stony face, but her eyes were shining. Che-Rin took off her glasses. Lizzie held Button close to her and sniffled. Each was crying for her own reasons, for what she had lost, for what she had run away from, for what she hadn't had time to say. They buried Misty behind the house, in a small hole, wrapped in a silver blanket. Emma laid the cat down herself, lowered her into the ground, covered her with dirt, placed a stone on top, smooth, flat. Then she stood up, wiped her face, looked at Daniel, said thank you, quietly, simply, without a sigh, without any pretension, in an ordinary human voice. Daniel nodded. They went back to work. Emma sewed. Daniel fed the herd. Hannah milked the cows. Sadie chopped wood. Che-Rin dried herbs. Lizzie chased Red around the pen. Life went on. A week after Misty's funeral, horsemen appeared on the southern trail. Many. Daniel counted from the top of the hill. 12. In armor, with swords. A banner with a bear in a red circle. Baron Raynor. This time he didn't send anyone. He came himself. Daniel went down to the village. Sadie walked beside him. She now had a spear, bought at the fair, old, worn, but made of steel, and in her hands it looked as if it had been with her whole life. Baron Raynor dismounted by the well, tall, lean, 40 years old, dark hair with gray at the temples, a fur-lined cloak, a sword at his belt, a B-rank blood knight. He looked like a man who owned everything he set his eyes on. Daniel approached. Raynor looked down at him. He saw a skinny, barefoot boy in a dirty shirt. Beside him, a red-haired girl with a rusty spear. Behind them, a village of 20 houses. He smiled. He spoke. His voice was velvety, polite, charming. He said he'd heard a lot, that he was impressed, that talent should be encouraged, that he was ready to offer protection. Real protection, not threats, land, a title, protection from bandits and competitors. Everything a small farm needs to become big. In exchange for what? Daniel asked. Raynor smiled. In exchange for loyalty. The herd stays with Daniel, but the wool goes through Raynor. At his prices, to his people, to his tailors. And if necessary, Daniel provides the Baron with fighters from among his own men. Daniel listened. His face was calm. Fighters. He said he had no fighters. He had a milkmaid, a herbalist, a seamstress, a girl with a lamb, and a paladin with a rusty spear. Raynor looked at Sadie. He recognized her, the order's brand on her neck. His eyes narrowed. A former novice, a deserter. Interesting. Daniel said no. Thanks for the offer, but no. Raynor stopped smiling. He was silent for a moment. Then he said quietly that refusal was unwise, that winter was long, that the roads were dangerous, that who knew what might happen to a small farm far from the nearest garrison. Daniel looked him in the eye, calmly, without defiance, without fear. Raynor looked back. Then he turned to the horse, put his foot in the stirrup, and then Daniel did what he hadn't planned to do. He walked over to Raynor's horse, a big stallion, a war horse, 600 kilograms, maybe more. Daniel placed his hands under the horse's belly, lifted it, the horse, along with the Baron, who was already in the saddle, lifted it like a sack of hay, easily, smoothly, without a jerk, moved it to the other side of the fence, carefully. The horse wasn't hurt. The Baron didn't fall. He just ended up on the other side of the fence. Daniel looked up at him. He said, "Your Grace." You've come to the wrong place. Silence. 12 soldiers froze. Rainer sat in the saddle, pale. He had just seen a skinny guy lift a warhorse in full tack with its rider, in a single motion, effortlessly. An F-rank herdsman. That's what it says in the registry, F rank. Rainer didn't say a word. He turned his horse around, rode away. 12 soldiers behind him, silently, quickly, without looking back. Sadie stood nearby with her spear. Her mouth was open. Then she closed it. She looked at Daniel. She said one word. Show off. Daniel shrugged. Half the village had gathered behind the fence. They stood and watched. The village elder, the blacksmith, the miller, Horlick, Neil, the priest, Dan's ex-fiancée with her husband. Everyone saw. Everyone. Daniel knew this was a mistake, that rumors would spread now, that his secret was no longer a secret. But at that moment, when Rainer was threatening his people and his herd, at that moment, he wasn't thinking about secrets. He was thinking about how dangerous the roads were in winter and how anything could happen. He was thinking about Khan and Lizzie and Kanopka. Winter dragged on. The rumor that the herdsman from the Hollow had thrown Baron Rainer off his warhorse spread throughout the region within a week. Each retelling added details. By the end of the month, the story went that Daniel had thrown the horse across the river, and the Baron had been in the air for 3 seconds. Daniel smirked when he heard it. He hadn't thrown anyone, he'd just moved him. But people need legends, and legends need shepherds who throw barons. People started coming to him, not from Lushchina, from far away. The first to arrive was a boy from the village beyond the pass, 14 years old, a fisherman's son, F. His face was bruised. His father beat him because the altar had chosen a fisherman instead of a warrior. The boy stood by the pen and said nothing. Daniel asked what he could do. The boy said he could catch fish, in the stream behind the grove. Daniel said that fish is protein. Protein is needed by ewes in the 3rd trimester. The boy blinked. Daniel explained. Fish meal. Dried fish ground into powder. Add it to the feed for pregnant. It improves milk quality. It strengthens the lamb's immune systems. The boy listened. His eyes lit up. No one had ever told him that a fisherman could be useful to anyone other than a cat. Daniel said, "Come tomorrow with your catch." The boy came, with a bucket of fish. A week later, a fisherman showed up at Lushchina. Then a woman from the county town arrived. 30 years old, Class E beekeeper. Her husband had died. Creditors had taken the hives. She was left with 2 children. Daniel asked if she knew about propolis. The woman was surprised. Of course she knew. Daniel said that propolis, mixed with Cheirin's ointment, makes an antiseptic that no one else in the area has. The woman listened. Cheirin came out of the shed. She adjusted her glasses. She looked at the woman. She said she needed an assistant. The woman stayed. Then an old man came, Class F berry picker, 50 years old, alone. His family had disowned him when he went blind in one eye. Daniel asked if he knew where certain herbs grew in the area. The old man knew every bush within a 20-mile radius. Daniel sat him down next to Cheirin. They talked for 3 hours. Cheirin filled 10 pages of her notebook. The old man stayed. Daniel didn't call any of them. They came on their own, just as Kanopka came to his hand on the first day. Just like Hana came for milk. Just like Sadie fell by the well. People came to him because they heard the same thing. There's a guy in the Hollow, a real piece of trash. But he doesn't think you're trash. By midwinter, 23 people besides the locals were living in the Hollow, plus the villagers, a small community. Daniel didn't give it a name. He didn't set rules. He didn't write bylaws. He just worked, and people worked alongside him. Everyone did what they knew how to do. The fisherman caught fish. The beekeeper prepared propolis. The old man drew a map of plants. 2 guys from distant villages with the classes of apprentice and porter built new pens and sheds. A woman with the rank of laundress washed wool for Emma. A 14-year-old girl with the rank of gatherer helped Che-Rin dry herbs. Everyone useless, everyone trash, everyone needed here. The flock was growing. The winter lambings yielded 8 more lambs, all alive. Daniel accepted each one. Hannah was there for every lambing. She had become his right-hand woman, not by decision, but by fact. Without her, the flock didn't function. She knew every sheep, every goat, every lamb. She saw the sick one before it got sick. She sensed the nervous one before it ran. Daniel once asked Che-Rin quietly. He asked if she had ever seen a classless person who worked with animals like that. Che-Rin adjusted her glasses. She said that being classless wasn't the absence of class. It was a class the altar couldn't read, like a blank page. But blank didn't mean empty. Maybe the page was just waiting for ink. Daniel looked at Hannah. She was standing in the pen, among the sheep. They surrounded her in a circle, pressing close, rubbing against her. Hannah stroked them, one by one, calling them by name, in a quiet voice. And the sheep listened, just as they listened to him. Daniel didn't say anything to Hannah. It was too soon. But he remembered Che-Rin's words. A blank page waits for ink. At the end of winter, Minji's son arrived. She didn't just come. She arrived. On horseback, in a travel coat, with 2 servants. The daughter of the village headman from the neighboring village, 18 years old, water mage class C. Beautiful. She knew it. She came on an inspection, officially. Her father sent her to see what kind of farm had appeared in Loschina, and whether it was true that a shepherd was raising horses there. Minji dismounted. She looked around. She saw the pens, the barn, and a herd. People. She saw Daniel, skinny, barefoot, with a lamb in his arms. She raised an eyebrow. He was that very famous shepherd. She asked with a hint of mockery. Daniel confirmed it. Minji walked around the farm. She looked. She assessed. Her lips were pursed. She had expected something grand. She saw manure, straw, sheep, and a skinny guy who was explaining to her why the pen was located right here and not 50 paces to the left. Because here, the south wind didn't blow through the door, and water from the spring flowed down the gutter by gravity. Minji listened half-heartedly. Then Daniel led her to the irrigation ditch. Small, shallow. He had dug it in the fall. It carried meltwater from the pen to the lower field. The field belonged to Neil. Ever since the water had been directed to the field, the barley harvest had doubled. Daniel looked at Minji. He asked if she could direct the water. She was a water mage. Could she make the ditch work more efficiently? Minji looked at the ditch. She crouched down. She touched the water. She concentrated. She raised her hand. The water in the ditch obediently rose and flowed faster. Then it subsided. Minji frowned. Daniel asked what would happen if the flow were directed not straight, but in a spiral, like a stream winding around rocks. That way, the pressure is distributed more evenly, and the water goes farther. Minji looked at him. Her eyes were different. Not mocking, sharp, interested. She tried it. She raised the water, swirled it into a spiral, directed it along the channel. The water flowed, fast, far, 3 times farther than a straight stream. Minji stared at the water, then at Daniel, then at the water again. She said that in 3 years at magic school, no one had ever suggested she make the water spiral. Daniel shrugged. He said it wasn't magic. It was physics. A spiral flow conserves energy longer than a straight one. Minji sat down on the edge of the ditch, right in the mud. Her expensive jacket, mud. She didn't care. She looked at the water and at him, and at the water, and at him. The servants stood behind them, exchanging glances. Minji sent them home. She said she would stay, not for long, to study irrigation techniques. The servants left. Minji stayed. A day, 2, a week, She followed Daniel around and asked questions about water, about drainage, about the slope of the surface and the flow rate. Daniel answered, patiently, simply. Minji took notes. Not in a notebook, in her head. Her memory was perfect. Then she began to apply it. She widened the ditch with magic in an hour. Work that would have taken 10 men 2 days. She ran a second one to Martha's garden, a third to the watering hole of the pen. Water flowed everywhere, clean, fast, controlled. The village got irrigation. In the middle of winter, when not a single village in the area had even thought of such a thing. Minji stood by the ditch and watched the water flow toward the corral. Her face wet with splashes, her jacket dirty, her hair tousled. She was smiling. For the first time in all the time Daniel had known her. Not a flirtatious smile. Spring came to the hollow with rains. The snow melted in a week. The hillsides turned green. The first grass pushed through the old. The flock went out to pasture, and Daniel stood on the hilltop and counted. 53 sheep, 11 goats, 2 donkeys, 3 dogs, 1 horse. The dogs had strayed in during the winter. The first to arrive was an old hunting bitch, skinny, abandoned by her owner. Daniel nursed her back to health. Broth, bandages, warmth. She stayed. 2 young mutts followed her, the kind that roam the roads, hungry, angry. Daniel didn't chase them away. He fed them. A week later, they were patrolling the corral and growling at strangers, herding dogs, untrained, but their instincts were working. Horlick brought the horse, an old mare. The owner wanted to slaughter her for meat. Horlick bought her for a silver coin, brought her to Daniel, said she didn't have long left, but might come in handy. Daniel examined the mare. 20 years old, but not sick, teeth intact, hooves overgrown but healthy beneath the growths. Her back had sagged but was still sturdy. She didn't have much time left. She had about 5 years left if cared for properly. He trimmed her hooves, combed her mane, gave her oats. He named the mare Lady. Lady stood in the pen next to the donkeys and looked at him with her big, dark eyes. Calm, grateful. A thread of energy stretched from her on the 3rd day. Powerful. A horse is not a sheep. A horse is mass, strength, speed, endurance. The energy flow from Lady was like that of 5 sheep, maybe more. The morning influx from the entire herd and the beasts was such that Daniel stopped measuring his strength in terms of ranks. He didn't know for sure, but he suspected that based on raw stats, he was already at the A rank level, maybe higher. The system window showed only a new line, Path of Development, Herder D, Next Step, Keeper of the Herds. Condition: take 100 animals of 5 species under your protection. Raise 3 generations of healthy offspring. Gain the voluntary recognition of the human community. 100 animals. He had 70. 5 species. He has 5. Sheep, goats, donkeys, dogs, a horse. 3 generations of offspring. The first generation of lambs from the count. The second from the prince. The third will come in 6 months. Voluntary recognition by the community. What does that mean? He didn't know, not yet. On the 200th day after waking up, 2 events occurred. The first, in the morning, dawn, the influx. Daniel stood among the herd and received the threads. And another one appeared among them, not from an animal, from a human. He froze. The thread came from Hana, thin, silvery, not like the ones from a sheep, different, lighter, more transparent, but it was there. Hana stood 10 paces away from him, milking a ewe, unaware, unfeeling, but the thread was there. Daniel stood and thought, a human, Hana, classless. No, not classless. Che-Rin was right, a blank page, and the ink had finally arrived. His class, his aura, his presence beside her day after day, month after month. Hana grew beside him like a plant beside a water source. Her class was unfolding, slowly, quietly, like a bud. Daniel didn't tell her. Didn't want to pressure her. He didn't want to scare her. Let her grow on her own. The second event, in the evening. A horseman appeared on the southern trail, alone. Not a soldier, not a merchant. A knight. In full armor, with a coat of arms on his cloak. Not Raynor's. The coat of arms of the Order of the Silver Spear. The knight rode up to the corral, dismounted, removed his helmet. Young, about 25. His face was weary. His eyes were attentive. He looked at Daniel. He looked at the herd. He looked at the corral and the barns and the people. He introduced himself. Sir Gareth, of the Order of the Silver Spear, a recruiter, sent to find anomalies in the southern provinces. He said the Order was preparing for the third breach. The rift in the north is thinning. In a year, maybe 2, maybe sooner, the Twisted will come crawling out. The kingdom is gathering everyone who can fight, every class, every rank. He'd heard about the shepherd from the hollow, heard about the horse and the baron. He'd come to see for himself. Daniel listened, calmly. Sir Gareth continued speaking. The Order is offering a contract, service, 2 years, a salary, protection, rank, opportunities. In exchange, Daniel would travel to the northern border and help prepare the defenses. Daniel looked at the knight, then at the herd, then at Hannah, who was standing by the corral, at Sadie with the spear, at Charon in the barn doorway, at Emma by the window, at Lizzie with Button, at Minji by the trough, then back at the knight. He said no. Sir Gareth wasn't surprised. He nodded. He asked if he could stay the night. Daniel said yes. He fed him. Cheese, bread, milk, broth. The knight ate and said nothing. Then he said he hadn't eaten so well in a long time. Then he asked why Daniel had refused. Daniel said he couldn't leave the herd. Without him, it would wither away. And without the herd, he was just an ordinary guy. The knight thought for a moment. Then he asked what if the breach reached here, to the hollow. Daniel was silent for a moment. Then he said that if it did, he would meet it here, with his herd, in his own way. The knight looked at him for a long time. Then he nodded. He left in the morning, with 3 heads of cheese and a promise to think it over. Daniel watched him go. The breakthrough. He hadn't thought about it before, didn't want to think about it. He had a herd, people, a farm, the little life he'd been building day by day. But the world doesn't ask if you're ready. The world just comes. On the 220th day, the system flashed, a new line. Attention! The Altar Guild Registry has detected an anomaly in the region. The D-rank cattle breeder class has been registered as a deviation from the standard development tree. A file has been opened. Surveillance has begun. Daniel read it. He reread it. A file has been opened. Someone inside the system, inside the guild, is watching him, knows that his class has evolved in a way it shouldn't have. A secret council he knows nothing about, but which, 1,000 years ago, suppressed the shepherd class. They've found him. Daniel stood on the hill, a wind from the north, the scent of, and something else, something distant, something ancient. He looked at the herd, 70 heads on the green slope, silvery wool in the spring sun. Knopf nearby, Hannah by the corral, Sadie with a spear, 6 girls, 23 people from the trash classes, a small valley, 3 hills, a spring. They found it. Fine, let them find it. It isn't going anywhere. He is a shepherd. He stands with his flock. Year. Daniel stood at the top of the eastern hill and looked down at the valley. The hollow below had changed. No longer a small village of 20 houses. A small town. New houses, new barns. Emma's workshop, Che-Rin's lab, the smithy set up by one of the newcomers. A guy with the skills of an apprentice who turned out to be a jack of all trades.
A school. Not a real one. A barn with benches.
But Daniel came there every evening and told stories. About animals, about the earth, about water, about how to care for living things. The children listened. The adults, too. The herd. Daniel counted 120 animals. Sheep, goats, donkeys, dogs, horses, mules. 24 dogs. Not all of them his, but all within his aura. They all gave off threads. 120 streams every dawn. A power he had stopped thinking about because it had become like breathing. Natural, constant, enormous. 3 generations of lambs. The first from the count, strong, robust. The second from the prince, fast, with thick wool. The third was born this spring, from the best rams of both. Daniel selected the pairs himself. He recorded them in a notebook he'd kept since the first month. Selection. Genetics without genetics. Experimentation without a lab. The result was there. The 3rd generation lambs were born larger, healthier. Their wool was finer and longer. Their undercoat was thicker. 3 generations. The condition was met. Voluntary recognition by the community. He found out what that meant a week ago. The village headman came to see him. The very same one. The one who, a year ago, had wanted to turn him into a farmhand. He came and said that the village wanted Daniel to become the headman, instead of him. Daniel refused, said he didn't have time. The flock. The headman nodded. Then he said that, in that case, let Daniel at least be an advisor. The voice of the village, the person they turn to when they don't know what to do. Daniel said he already was that person. Everyone came to him anyway. The village head smiled. He said that was exactly why the village was asking, because that was already the case. They just needed to say it out loud, to acknowledge it, voluntarily. Everyone. The village gathered in the evening. Everyone. Locals and newcomers. More than 100 people. They stood by the corral. They looked at Daniel. He stood among them, a skinny guy, barefoot, with kanapka at his feet. The village elders said that Loshchina recognized Dan the shepherd as the guardian of the valley, the voice of the community, the protector of the herds. People nodded. Horlick first, Neil, Martha, Bryn, the miller, the blacksmith. Even the priest nodded. Reluctantly, but he nodded. Dan's ex-fiancée stood in the crowd, with her husband, with a child in her arms. She had given birth 6 months ago, a boy, healthy, because she'd drunk milk from Daniel's sheep throughout her pregnancy. She looked at Daniel, nodded. Something in her eyes, not love, not regret, recognition, that she'd been wrong back then, when she left that guy with the trash class. Daniel wasn't thinking about that. He was thinking about how the system had flashed. Condition met. Evolution available. 120 charges, 5 species, 3 generations, community recognition. He closed his eyes, activated. The world changed. The threads didn't just flash. They became visible. Not to him, to everyone. For a second. For one endless second, 120 threads of silvery light stretched from every animal to Daniel, and from Daniel to every person standing nearby. A network. Alive. Warm. Pulsating. People froze. Everyone saw their own thread, their place in the web, their purpose. Hana saw dozens of thin threads extending from her to the animals and the people at the same time. Sadie saw her thread glowing brighter than the others, golden, protective. Charin saw green threads, healing. Emma saw silver ones, creative. Lizzie saw fast ones, agile, like Mercury. Minji saw blue ones, watery. Then the light went out. The threads vanished. People blinked, looked at each other, didn't understand what had happened, but they felt it. Something had changed. Daniel stood in the center. Class, herd keeper. Rank, B. A new line in the system window. Aura of life. Passive. All living creatures within the Guardian's radius receive enhanced health. Diseases are slowed. Wounds heal faster. Growth is accelerated. And one more. Voice of the Earth. Active. The Guardian can call for help from all bound creatures simultaneously. United strength. United will. Toward a single goal. Daniel opened his eyes. He looked north. The wind from the mountains carried a scent, not of rain, not of snow, of rot. Sweet, heavy rot. The scent of the rift. He could smell it now, clearly, distinctly, like a shepherd senses a wolf 3 hills away. The rift was opening. The third breach was beginning. A month later, the first news arrived. A messenger from the county seat. The northern fortresses had fallen. The Twisted had breached the first line of defense. The army was retreating. The second line was on the river, but they wouldn't hold it. Everyone capable of fighting must head north. The village froze. Fear, panic. People ran to gather their belongings, to flee anywhere to the south, further from the rift. Daniel stood on the hill. He looked north. He thought. Then he went down. He gathered his people. Khan, Sadie, Che-Rin, Emma, Lizzie, Minji. He sat by the corral. Button was nearby. Graf was nearby. The herd was all around. He said he wouldn't leave. The Hollow is his land, his herd, his people. He wouldn't lead 120 heads down roads where panic and chaos reigned. He would meet the breakthrough here, in his own way. Sadie stood up. She took a spear. She said she would meet him right beside him. Hannah stood up. She didn't say anything. She just stood beside him, on his right. Che-Rin adjusted her glasses. She said she had enough healing pouches and smoke mixtures. Emma took a roll of fabric out of the chest, silver-colored, the strongest kind, for bandages. Minji raised her hand. The water in the ditch rose and froze into a wall. Daniel smiled. Then he looked at Lizzie. Lizzie was sitting on the fence, Knopf on her lap. She said she'd climb a tree and whistle if she saw any creatures. Daniel, perfect. Then he turned toward the village. People were standing, watching, not running away, standing. Horlick, with a pitchfork. Neil, with an axe. The blacksmith, with a hammer. The miller, with a hefty club. The fisherman, with a harpoon. The beekeeper, with a smoker. The apprentice, with pliers. A porter, with a crowbar. A laundress, with a bucket of boiling water. A gatherer, with a slingshot. 23 trash-class people, with tools instead of weapons. They stood and looked at Daniel. Because over the course of a year, he had fed, healed, and warmed each of them at least once. Dan's ex-fiancée stood next to her husband with a hammer, she with a child. She didn't leave. The priest stood last, without a smarmy smile, with a pale face, but he stood, he didn't run. The village elder arrived. He stood next to Horlick. He nodded to Daniel. Daniel nodded back. Then he turned north. He waited. They came at dawn on the third day. 20 creatures, distorted, black, large, moving strangely, as if the world around them were breaking. The air trembled, the earth groaned, the dogs howled. Lizzie whistled from the tree, loudly, clearly. 20, from the north, fast. Daniel stood up. He stepped out of the pen. The herd followed him. 120 animals, not in panic, not in flight, calmly, confidently. 20 dogs on either side, the donkey and horses behind, sheep and goats in front. Daniel walked in the center, Hannah on his right, Sadie on his left with a spear. Behind them, the village. Minji drew water from the stream, a wall, icy, transparent. It stood across the valley. Che-Rin handed out pouches to everyone. Emma was wrapping the fighters' hands with strips of silvery fabric, thick, sturdy, instead of gloves. Daniel walked toward the creatures. The aura of life burned around him like an invisible dome. Everyone standing nearby could feel it. The warmth, the strength, the confidence. The fear hadn't gone away, but it grew quieter, like a noise behind a wall. The first creature struck Minji's wall of water. The wall buckled, but it didn't burst. Minji clenched her teeth. The water swirled into a spiral. The energy dissipated. The creature flew back. 3 others circled around the wall. Sadie met the first one. The spear pierced the black flesh. The creature screamed. Sadie pulled the spear out and struck again. An S-rank paladin, hungry, angry, 6 months of humiliation, and now she had something to defend. The dogs lunged at the second one. 20 dogs, untrained, but loyal. They tore at it, bounced back, teared at it again. A third creature broke through the line. It was heading for the flock, for the pen, for the lambs. Daniel stood in its way, alone. A skinny, barefoot guy. The creature was twice his size, black, with fangs, with claws, with eyes in which there was nothing but hunger. It lunged at him. It struck with its whole body. Its claws dug into his chest. Or tried to. They didn't go in. They stopped at the skin. Daniel stood his ground. 120 animals had given him everything, every morning, every day, every night. A year of suffering concentrated in a single body. He took the blow, didn't fall, didn't back down, stood, and placed his hand on the creature's muzzle. The creature froze. Daniel looked into its eyes. Black, empty, hungry. But deep inside, very deep, something flickered. Not anger, not hunger, fear. The creature was afraid, like an animal cornered, like a lamb caught in barbed wire, like a ewe unable to lamb. Fear, pain, loneliness. Daniel kept his palm on its snout. He activated the voice of the earth, not as a weapon, as a call, like that first call of the herd when 33 heads turned toward him and came. Only now behind him stood 120 animals and 100 men and 6 girls and a small valley between 3 hills and a year of life in which every day began with care. He said quietly, "Quiet. You too were someone's herd once." Quiet. The creature trembled, all over. Its claws retracted, its eyes shifted, the black receded. Beneath it, something else, not white, not light, just alive. The creature sank to the ground, slowly, like a lamb that was tired. It lay down, pressed itself against his leg. Daniel stood there, his hand on its head. Everything around them froze, people, animals, even the wind died down. The other creatures stopped, one by one, like a herd that sees its leader has lain down. They froze. They lowered their heads. They didn't attack. They didn't retreat. They just stood there, waiting. On the hill south of the hollow, at that very spot from which the entire valley is visible, stood Baron Gustav Rainer, with a spyglass. He had come to watch as the upstart shepherd perished under the fangs of the twisted. He saw everything. He dropped the spyglass. His arm hung limply. His face was pale. To the north, in the mountains near the rift, something had changed. It hadn't closed, but it had fallen silent, as if someone very ancient, very distant, had opened their eyes and seen, for the first time in 1,000 years. Seen that down below in the small valley stood a man doing what the first shepherd had done. Not with a sword, not with magic, not with an army. With care, with connection, with trust. A thread stretched from the rift to the hollow. Thin, ancient, silvery. Daniel felt it. He raised his head. He looked north. Far away, very far away. But he saw. He felt. Someone was looking at him. Not with hostility, with hope. The camera slowly rose above the valley. Green slopes, a silvery herd. People standing shoulder to shoulder, animals lying at the shepherd's feet, dogs nearby, cats, horses, donkeys,
Goats, sheep, all together. You could hear bleating, mooing, barking.
Hannah stood nearby. She took Daniel by the hand, quietly, simply, just as she took the mug of milk every morning, naturally. He looked at her, gray eyes, a calm face. There was no fear in it, no doubt, only light, the same silvery light as in the wool of his sheep. Daniel smiled. He said, "Good morning, by the way." Hannah smiled, for the first time, widely, openly, without fear. Nop bleated at their feet. Graf stood at the edge of the slope, old, wise, horns twisted 1.5 turns. He looked north, calmly, confidently, like a ram who knows his shepherd is nearby, and that means everything will be all right. The sun was rising over 3 hills. A new day, a new dawn, a new stream. 120 threads, and one new one, thin, silvery, ancient, from the north, from the one who had waited 1,000 years. The story of the Hollow was just beginning.